Chapter 794. 2 days later, Huaishir was discharged from the hospital after the observation. The doctors in the hospital lined up to applaud and send him off warmly. The atmosphere was extremely strange. It was as if they were celebrating the release of a prisoner from prison and hoped that he could turn over a new leaf. However, it was already good enough that he was not sent to the VIP room in the hospital. Huaishir did not dare to be too particular. He did not know how he got there, but when he came back, he went straight to the Bifrost. He went directly from the Wangu Group's chain of border medical treatment to the border reception of the Ingzhou branch of the central administration. Among the bustling crowd, Huaishir, a young man wearing a cap and carrying a saddlebag, was particularly conspicuous. He looked like a delivery man from yesterday. While lining up at the front desk of the office, he looked down at the messages on his phone. When it was his turn, he looked up and said to the receptionist, "I have an appointment at 1 o'clock this afternoon with Minister Yuxing of your department." The receptionist's polite smile stiffened. She looked up at the message on the screen, then looked at Huaishir and confirmed, "Sir, your name?" "Huaishir." Huaishir showed his ID. For a moment, the atmosphere changed, but it also seemed that it did not. It was as if the pause button was accidentally pressed. Soon, the picture began to flow again. The noise was still there, and even the footsteps on both sides were much more hurried. The clerk did not let Huaishir wait for too long. After quickly arranging the rite of passage for Huaishir, he returned his ID with both hands. The elevator on the left goes straight to the top floor. "Thank you." Huaishir politely said goodbye. It was not until the elevator door closed that the clerk curiously poked her head out and looked in the direction he left. Her expression was stunned and complicated. "What's wrong?" The colleague who came back from lunch looked over curiously. "You look like you saw a ghost." The clerk pointed in the direction he left. "The person you've been talking about these 2 days just went up." "Really?" The colleague could not believe it. She looked with her, but saw nothing. Will they quarrel? Who knows? The clerk shrugged. After all, he is Domba's hero. He didn't put on a show of strength as expected. He didn't even pretend to make Huaishir wait. After the elevator on the top floor opened, the secretary brought him to the reception room and served him tea. Not long after, the sound of heavy footsteps could be heard outside the door. René hurriedly pushed open the door and entered with a thick stack of documents in his hands. This was the first time he had met René. He did not expect him to be so thin. His eyes were full of shadows, like those of a night owl. It was also René's first time seeing him. He was surprised that he was so young. Both sides were surprised, but the oppressive and gloomy atmosphere was no different from what they had expected. Huaishir didn't get up, and René didn't greet them either. She just stared at him. "Look, who is this?" "It's our hero." Huaishir didn't answer. He just held his teacup, slurp, expressionless. René didn't hide his disgust and unhappiness. He sat in the chair opposite Huaishir, threw the documents in his hand in front of him, and asked directly, "Yu Dongri is dead?" "Yes. Wasn't the body found at the scene? Or is the report not clear enough?" Huaishir asked, "You are so enthusiastic. Are you in a hurry to burn incense on the 7th day of his death? Why don't we do it together? We can also kowtow in front of his grave and swear to be sworn brothers. When you kowtow, I will chop off your head with an axe, then kick you into the ditch so that you can share the anniversary of his death." He thought maliciously. "Huaishir, it's too much to expect you to be polite." René shook his head indifferently. "Is Yu Dongri really dead? It doesn't matter. Since the report has been handed in and the file has been deleted, he is dead. The decision-making room knows that you're hiding something, but the decision-making room doesn't care anymore. The talent you have shown is enough to redeem the mistakes you have made, even though you almost made everything go to waste." Huaishir finally raised his eyes. "What do you mean?" "What you understand," René said. "What you did almost made our work for a year go to waste." In the silence, Huaishir's eyes widened little by little. "René, what are you talking about? Have you finally realized it? You got yourself involved in the struggle between the Border Party and the Sovereignty Party." René sneered. "How do you think an important target like Yu Dongri was able to escape from prison? If it wasn't for the general administration's indulgence, how could a person who still has the resonance physique escape surveillance? From the beginning, this was a plan against Green Sun to interfere with the blockade of the border, Canaan through hybrids. Yu Dongri's escape from prison was just one part of it. The ultimate goal was to use his death to trigger a struggle between Green Sun and Golden Dawn, to isolate the hidden danger from the present realm. At the very least, the goal was to prevent the two sides from joining forces in the upcoming War of Worlds to ensure the safety of the present realm. Although under the influence of the Sovereignty Party, there were also variables like AI Qing and Huai Shi, but in the end, the expected result was still obtained. The Sovereignty Party obtained the right to speak, but the Border Party also obtained the predetermined goal. As early as a year ago, Rene's mission was to ensure the completion of all this. In the long silence, Huai Shi raised his head stiffly and looked at the man in front of him. Even if hundreds of thousands of innocent people have to be sacrificed for this, the result is to ensure the safety of hundreds of millions of people and ensure the stability of Yingzhou. Rene replied indifferently. For this, countless people have been sacrificed. Do you think you're the only hero, Huai Shi? How much do you think we have to pay to maintain this operation? Not only the Donbua Inner Circle, 8 years ago, in order to expel the erosion of the destructive element, Buoxuan, the entire Manchester was completely purified. 3 years ago, the border of Avalon was sacrificed to the last 1,000 people. After the collective sacrifice, it sank into hell after the permanent blockade. 2 years ago, in Chengdu, the immemorial sunk, and the elite team of the Dongxiao branch sacrificed more than 3,000 people. 4 years ago, in Florence and Rome, in order to save 200 survivors, the branch carried out a collective vivisection. The Madagascar tragedy, the Hindenburg massacre, the Farbach incident, except for a few people, including you, who had some achievements, the others died in obscurity. If you want to avoid those tragic results, you have to make cruel choices. You have to make sacrifices. Rene asked indifferently, Huai Shi, why can everyone in the world be sacrificed, but not those hybrids? Is it because they were born noble? Because sacrifice and consumption are two different things. Huai Shi raised his voice, suppressing his anger as he retorted, they are not lowly, and they are not a threat. They just want to live well. It is already very difficult to just live, but some people who hold justice in their hands still want to push them into the real hell. That stubborn look made Rene completely lose his patience. He coldly opened the document in front of him, pushed it over, and pointed to the empty space at the bottom. That was the approval document for the operation of the Donbua Inner Circle campus. Sign it. Take what I gave you and leave, Huai Shi, he said impatiently. From now on, don't appear in front of me again. Huai Shi lowered his head and looked at the document in front of him. After signing this, from now on, the Donbua Inner Circle would truly be free. This day had finally come, but for some reason, he suddenly remembered the happy smile of Sheng Tianmu. That was the redemption that the old man had been looking forward to all his life. But when this day finally came, he could no longer see it. For the sake of this mirage-like hope, how many people had struggled in hell? Sheng Tianmu, Song Jie, Qinya Long Air, and even the future of the divine city in despair. The number of people who died for this was uncountable. Niu Dao, Mizrahi, Akasaki. Now that this moment had finally come, Huai Shi could not feel any joy or joy. Instead, when he thought of those who had died, he could not help but want to cry. These are the treasures of those who sacrifice themselves, Rene. Huai Shi whispered softly. For this, they sacrificed everything, paid everything, waited for a lifetime, and wanted to defend and obtain the treasures. Rene did not speak. He just raised his hand coldly and handed over the signature pen. Huai Shi closed his eyes and sighed silently. He reached out, grabbed the signature pen, and pulled it out. It was at that moment that thunder burst forth. Huai Shi raised his eyes and looked at the man in front of him. A fierce light appeared in his dark eyes, like lightning bursting out of a thundercloud. The one-step distance was instantly torn apart by the tip of the signature pen, and it sank into Rene's throat. In an instant, blood spurted out. The skin on Huai Shi's arm cracked inch by inch, and cracks burst out of his bones. Under the recoil of Rene's protection, His fingers were twisted into strange shapes. "I don't need you to give it to me, Renee," he replied softly. "I will take what they left behind myself." Renee froze in place. He lowered his head in disbelief and saw the signature pen that pierced through his throat. His eyes widened. Almost instantly, a healing radiance descended from the sky and enveloped him. Then, a sharp sound burst forth, lingering in the ears of everyone in the branch at this moment. It was a spreading alarm. In Huaishir's hand, the signature pen was slowly pulled out. His twisted and broken fingers clenched tightly, and with a wisp of scarlet, a blood-stained name was left on the paper. When the door to the reception room was smashed to pieces, the ascendants who were guarding the room rushed in. What they saw was the contract written with blood. At the two ends of the long table, there were two people looking at each other indifferently. Huaishir calmly placed the signature pen next to the document and raised his head to look down at the opponent in front of him. He was arrogant and cold, as if the person who had just attacked the higher-ups of the Astronomy Association was not him. Even if Renee gave the order, he would be thrown into the trench prison and never see the light of day again. But he did not feel regret. Instead, he felt relieved and indescribably refreshed. Finally, he did not need to put on that fake smile to face everything. Perhaps this was the darkness and hostility that truly belonged to him under the vanity of the hero's halo. Just looking at the person in front of him made him want to chop off his head. He wanted to kill him. It was as if he also wanted to kill him. But in the end, Renee did not speak. He just raised his gloomy eyes and looked at him coldly. He let the blood in the rapidly shrinking wound on his throat flow out. He did not let his emotions affect his decisions or complicate matters. He restrained his anger, just like any qualified bureaucrat, always rational. He just raised his hand and pointed at the door. "Get out, Huaishir," he said. "Don't waste my time. Just what I want." Huaishir got up, picked up the document on the table, and turned to leave under the stunned gazes of the people around him. But when he stood in front of the door, he glanced back at the figure behind him. He did not want to say goodbye. He just politely said goodbye. "I hope we never see each other again." Just like that, he left without looking back, leaving behind a mess. When he walked out of the elevator again, he saw a familiar figure in the smoking room opposite. She was also looking at Huaishir. Her eyes were complicated. After a long time, she shook her head and sighed. Although not very rational, it is very much her style. "To be honest, I regret it, but it is too late for my brain to react." Huaishir shrugged. "He won't report me, will he? Isn't it a bit too late to panic now?" AI Qing glanced at him and could not help but sigh. "If someone comes to you because of this, you can write a resignation letter. Don't worry, the higher-ups will not accept it. At most, they will give you a warning and then suspend your position as the Inspector Shinhai. Then I will suffer a great loss. A fourth-grade military officer will become a second-grade military officer. You should be secretly happy." AI Qing said, "You are now the actual person in charge of Domwa's inner circle. There should be a new position for you. Even if there is no such thing, the Inspector of Shinhai will not let you hold the position anymore." "To be honest, I haven't reacted yet." Huaishir shrugged. "I don't know if I can get used to it." "You will get used to it eventually," AI Qing said. Huaishir sat on the chair next to her. He touched his pocket and realized that it was empty. He raised his head to ask, "Do you have a cigarette?" "A lady's." "That works too." AI Qing raised her hand and passed the cigarette box to Huaishir, but Huaishir looked at her bloody hand and hesitated for a moment. AI Qing glanced at him and shook her head. "You can have the whole box. I just opened it." "You are lucky. I thought you would say take as many as you want." "I don't mind." Huaishir took a sniff. "Is it mint-flavored?" "I bought it from the vending machine," AI Qing said. "I will give you the lighter as well. I brought it for you in the first place." The lighter was made from copper. It was not flashy. The simple style suited Huaishir's preference. It looked sturdy and durable. It was printed with the archaeological team's logo. It was specially made by the technical department to provide hellish survival equipment, especially since his name was carved on the base. "Thank you." Huaishir beamed. He opened and closed the lighter, closed and opened it again. It crackled like a child playing with a toy. "When are you leaving?" He couldn't help but ask. In half an hour, she said. I'm going to catch the train in a while. Huaishir was stunned for a moment. He raised his head and said, I was thinking of going for a drink together. AI Ching was amused. Milk tea. You can drink anything else if you want. Forget it. AI Ching shook her head. Drinking during the day will ruin things. I have to report when I get back. I'll send you back. No need. It's just a few steps. AI Ching slowly got up and turned to say goodbye. However, when she turned around, she saw Huaishir walking up to her. He suddenly reached out and hugged her gently. Thank you, Huaishir said softly. After a long time, he heard AI Ching's laughter and felt the stiff AI Ching in his arms gradually relax. It's okay, she murmured softly. When Huaishir let go of his hand, AI Ching took a step back. She seemed to want to say something, but in the end, she just said calmly, Take care, Huaishir. Through the glass of the smoking room, Huaishir watched her turn and leave. She gradually walked away in the crowd in the distance. She didn't look back. There were several times when Huaishir wanted to chase after her, but he didn't know what to say. In the end, he quietly watched her figure disappear. In a long silence, he sat in the chair and held the lighter in his hand. After a long time, he quietly finished the cigarette she left behind and patted the dust on his pants. He silently said goodbye to the place where she left. Huaishir got up and walked in the direction of the customs. In front of the checkpoint leading to the present land, the bustling crowd was surging. They were watching the timetables of ships and trains on the huge screen. The long line slowly moved forward. Huaishir mingled among the passengers and looked around curiously, like a young man who had come to the present land for the first time. But through the customs, he could see a large crowd. In the crowd was the vice principal, Mr. Isaac. He had his head down and was seizing the time to review the thick reports and budgets. His expression was indifferent as always. At the front, Shang Ye held a sign high in his hand. When he grinned, his mouth was full of sharp teeth. He was looking around excitedly, attracting a lot of curious gazes. But the sign in his hand didn't have a name written on it. The word boss was written crookedly. God knows who he could meet. Huaishir scratched his head, but he couldn't help but laugh. He didn't know why, but he didn't feel so lonely anymore. Soon, he finally walked in front of the customs window. He raised his hand and handed his ID to the inspector. Behind the window, the inspector looked down at his ID, then looked up at him. He nodded and stamped to let him through. Welcome to Kyoto, sir, he said. I wish you all the best. The process of passing through the checkpoint was almost unbelievably smooth. There were no questions, which made Huaishir a little surprised. You didn't even ask for my name? The inspector laughed. I know you. The stranger pointed to the newspaper beside him. The smiling face on the headline of tomorrow's news was so clear. He said, Your name is Huaishir. Event limited gold card. No. One king of Donbua, Huaishir, leader. Miracles operate on the earth. When this card enters the battlefield, the depth of the battlefield -1. All hell creatures will be intimidated by this round of attacks. Sacrifice. Move all the cards of the same faction from the graveyard back to your hand. If more than 10 cards are moved back to your hand, flip them and obtain the effect Future. Future. The cost of cards of the same faction and frame cards you cast can be 0. The sun will rise again. I promise. Everything will have a bright future. Chapter 795. Name. Huaishir. Gender. Male. Age. Age. After a long period of silence, Huaishir shut his eyes and took a deep breath. Then, he turned back and looked at the man behind him. Hey, do you really have to go to this extent? He pointed at the safe and couldn't help but want to split it open with his axe. It's just a bloody identity verification. Do you really have to go to this extent? Ah, this didn't everyone say that you like it? Raymond was stunned. This is something that the Grandmaster had specially prepared for you. Something about not forgetting traditional arts and crafts. Huaishir was furious. Isn't it good for you to get some work done in the mortal realm? This is just an identity verification. Don't take it to heart. Raymond raised his finger and pointed at the safe. Time's almost up. Hurry up. If you get it wrong 3 times, the lock cylinder will automatically lock itself. Age? The rigid electronic voice on the safe urged him. Huaisher rolled his eyes. 18. An ear-piercing alarm sounded, and the electronic voice suddenly became high-pitched and filled with murderous intent. Wrong answer. Lock cylinder locked. Engine overloaded, ready to self-destruct. 3, 2, 1. The corners of Huaisher's eyes twitched wildly. Before he could even lay down tactically, he saw the door of the safe spring open with a bang, and a large pile of confetti and fireworks spewed out from within. Surprise! Raymond jumped out from behind, blowing a paper whistle in his hand. Aren't you surprised? Aren't you surprised? Bloody hell. Huaisher pulled out the axe of wrath and slashed at Raymond's old face. This is what you call a bloody surprise. Wait, it's fine if you chop me to death, but don't damage this thing. It's old and expensive. Wait a minute. Raymond shrank behind the safe. As the pivot turned, layers of sealed alloy layers opened up, and the alchemy matrix hidden within reorganized, propping up the core of the safe. In the open safe, a 24-sided cube the size of a human head slowly rose. It looked like a work of art carved from obsidian, but the countless tiny lines on it were like a matrix formed by overlapping characters. It defied gravity and floated in the air, reflecting waves of mysterious light. Utopia Type 4v4. 12. The core of the large-scale framework that the creator had meticulously created was, in short, the heart and engine that maintained the large-scale fixed framework for a long time. By burning origin substances and creating principles, the effects that the creator had set up were maintained. Although it did not possess extreme offensive and defensive capabilities, or even the enhancement of various special abilities as the most balanced Type 4, it was undoubtedly the most suitable item for the current Doomsday Inner Circle. It was also an indispensable part of a school district's defense. The core framework of Utopia was the best-selling product in Utopia back then. It was known for its stability, efficiency, and perfect quality-price ratio. It had been equipped in countless small gathering areas at the border and in Hell. Now, it was monopolized by the Ivory Tower, and it had entered version 4.12 after years of upgrades. For a medium-large framework like this one to be used in the present world, it took years to make, and the price was meaningless. There was no market for it, even if there was a price. It was usually used as a precious resource to be exported and traded with other parties. Under the normal mode, it inherited a large-scale local area network, simultaneously running hundreds of thousands of origin substance communication threads, 24-hour monitoring without any blind spots, radar, identity authentication, and the maintenance of various principles. Simply put, it was a God mode that covered the entire Doomsday Inner Circle. Although it was not as flexible as the creator himself, it could still be used to control the weather and achieve various effects. This also included the most important cognitive control. It could interfere with ordinary people's origin substances to a certain extent. Although it was not as bug-like as the Astronomical Society's mimetic control, it could still make beast-type individuals less conspicuous. It could also make the people who entered subjectively ignore some things that were not so important. At this moment, in the underground core area of the Doomsday Inner Circle, Huaisher held the box in his hands and carefully walked through the heavily sealed door. With the help of a dozen or so scholars, he embedded the core framework into the base. Following a burst of light, countless characters and principles appeared from the core and slowly rotated. As the scholars made adjustments, one by one, they were connected to an external interface. First, it was the control of the core area of the present world, followed by the control of the outer area of the campus, and then extended outwards. In the blink of an eye, it covered all of the streets of the Doomsday Inner Circle. In the blink of an eye, everything seemed to be under his control. Huaisher flipped through the thick manual in his hands and carefully set all of the parameters under the guidance of the scholars, following him according to the steps. Finally, he let out a sigh of relief. Even though everything was under control, he couldn't play with this toy at all. Even the slightest mistake in the decimal point or parameter would lead to unimaginable consequences. This was not something that could be done casually. If the composition of the air was even slightly wrong, tens of thousands of people would be poisoned to death in less than half an hour. Every time this toy was adjusted, it required both Huaishur and the management personnel to certify the origin substances. This was to prevent some naughty child from carelessly pressing a few buttons and causing the entire region's population to collectively die. In the end, as the core framework resonated with the border of the ivory tower, the data channel was opened. The projection of the ivory tower far away at the border descended into this huge underground facility. All of the participants couldn't help but applaud excitedly. It had nothing to do with the construction of a campus on the surface. Only the smooth operation of this core framework was proof that the present world campus had established a foundation. Whether it was in terms of laws, records, or even actual control, at this moment, the Dambwa Inner Circle was already completely under Huaishur's control. In name, in theory, and in practice, these three conditions were fulfilled. This was the guarantee that the Dambwa Inner Circle was independent of the capital, the Ingzhou system, and the entire Ingzhou system. It was almost equivalent to a country within a country. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that the Ivory Tower's main school was in a state of letting the Dambwa Inner Circle grow. Human resources and finance were all handled by Huaishur. In terms of administration, Huaishur had the final say. It was as if the first step of the Ivory Tower's return to the present world after 57 years was in his hands. The pressure is as great as a mountain. Huaishur sat in a chair and stared at the framework matrix on the ceiling. He couldn't help but sigh. It had been more than a month since he was officially discharged. Vice Principal Isaac had already left after dealing with the aftermath of the Swamp People's disease. He was too busy with his own school's matters to worry about the Dambwa Inner Circle. The rest of the complicated matters were all thrown to Huaishur. Huaishur could only force a duck onto a perch and take care of them one by one. Now that a framework had been set up, it could be said that he had achieved in-progress results. The construction of the Dambwa Inner Circle could be said to be a long way off. As the Ivory Tower's present world campus, it was also the entrance to the school's present world students. It was responsible for selecting talents for the school. At the same time, it was also a group with education as its main business core. In addition to the 4 primary schools that were currently established and a middle school that was under construction, there was also a university for ordinary people that was about to be completed. With the help of the Ivory Tower's channels, Huaishur was gradually fulfilling his promise to the Dambwa Inner Circle. Clean water, healthy food, stable order, equal medical treatment, and finally, a sound education. With the school as the core, it replaced the former alliance and carried out substantial jurisdiction and control over the current Dambwa district. Now, the present world campus and the Dambwa Inner Circle were almost becoming Huaishur's private property. At the same time, it was also burdened with a huge amount of loans and debts. Not to mention that the debt ratio of the Dambwa Inner Circle was now over the limit. Even Huaishur himself was only one step away from becoming a dishonest person. The other aspects of the supply could be said to be support for the subordinate units, but Huaishur himself still owed Russell 0.93% of the correction value. Moreover, he would never have dreamed that the reason for his bankruptcy was because of a cat. More than a month ago, War and Peace had turned 1,700 crow into ghosts in one fell swoop. What was consumed was not source substance, but the correction value of the Ivory Tower. It felt good to show off, but it was a crematorium. Moreover, the correction value was not something that could be transferred just because one wanted to, unless it was replaced by another person who was crowned. Otherwise, it belonged to whoever it belonged to. The distributor of the All Ages card was the gold card standard set by the world records and the 0.5% correction value was also given to the Dambwa Inner Circle that Huaishur represented. If Huaishur could really give the Dambwa Inner Circle the future he promised, then the changes caused in the following 30 years would be enough to meet the standard. But now, Huaishur only had 0.5% of the correction value. But Huaishur's personal correction value would not be calculated to the Ivory Tower. The divinity that he used to supply Great Si Ming was not even enough. Therefore, The correction value that he consumed from the ivory tower could only be gradually made up by increasing the changes that the ivory tower could bring to the world. Simply put, it was a job. Russell, that old bastard's abacus was loud and clear. As long as Huaishur settled the reality campus, this debt would definitely be paid off, and there would even be some left over. At that time, he would have proven his ability and talent, and the benefits that the organization gave him would not be in vain. But from this point of view, it coincided with Huaishur's next goal. However, when he woke up from his long pondering, he saw the person in front of him. He did not understand. "Why haven't you left yet?" Huaishur asked. "Was he going to stay for dinner?" Didn't I tell you?" "Then I must have forgotten." Raymond slapped the back of his head and took out a crumpled personnel assignment letter from his trouser pocket. "Recently, the school has no shortage of drivers. The principal thought that I still have so many loans to repay, so he sent me here as a tool." Huaishur's eyelids twitched wildly. Great, another mouth to feed. The landlord didn't have any spare food. "All right, the security captain has been arranged." Huaishur sighed. "It just so happens that I've been lacking a driver recently. It won't be hard on you, right? I'm a stage 3 ascendant, a battle-hardened mercenary, an elite traitor of the Eye of Nightmare. You want me to be your driver?" Raymond widened his eyes and was furious. "Are you insulting me, Huaishur? This is not something that can be solved with a few hundred yuan increase in salary." Huaishur could not help but want to roll his eyes. "Then how much do you want?" "At least 2,000. 1,000, no more." Huaishur got up and threw the car keys from his pocket. "Let's go and eat first. We still have to meet the people from the bank in the afternoon. Time is of the essence." He had to borrow money again. His heart ached. Chapter 796. The dark car drove on the empty street. Along the way, they saw busy construction sites. There were not many shops open, and further away, they could see the ruins piled up with rubble. "It looks so bleak," Raymond sighed. "Yes." Huaishur nodded. "There are many things waiting to be done." Today's Dombwa Inner Circle was managed by him after he unified and reorganized the personnel of his former allies. After the emergency disaster relief and resettlement, the next thing to do was the most important: reconstruction. A large number of jobs were provided, and he was not afraid that the refugees would cause any trouble when they had nothing to do. With a big stick in one hand and a carrot in the other, he settled the registration of household registration and identity. He provided a lot of benefits and priority job opportunities for the naturalized people, but also imposed more restrictions. At first, there was a lot of backlash, but over the past month, as the situation improved, more and more people began to support Huaishur's decision. Now, Dombwa Inner Circle was Huaishur's base. A full 1/5 of the people were his die-hard fans, and 3/5 were his general supporters. The rest were not a concern at all, as long as they did not cause any big trouble. The most convenient thing about the former extreme Dao management method was that no one dared to talk about human rights. If they made a mistake, they would cut off their fingers. If they did not change, they would chop off their hands. Even worse, there would be a private room in Jingdo Bay. But such a simple and crude management method could only be used for a while. If it wanted to last, it had to be regularized and strengthened as soon as possible. Huaishur did not need to think about these things. The ivory tower had already helped with the development plan of Dombwa District. A thick book was placed on Huaishur's desk like a manual. As long as they continued to do the work step by step, even a dog could get 60 points. The first purpose was to maintain stability and complete recovery and regeneration in the post-disaster reconstruction. Next, they would find a position based on their status as an independent border. The short-term goal was to gather the economy through the tourism and gambling industry, complete the development, and provide jobs and open up income channels to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. Once they lost their independent status, the economic lifeline would be controlled by the outside world. Even if Huaishur didn't allow it, the entire Dombwa Inner Circle would quickly turn into an internal oppression and return to the bad situation of the past. Once it fell back to that level, the sacrifices made by the Alliance and Huaishur's efforts would all be in vain. Even after this hope was shattered, the only thing that welcomed the Dombwa district was complete oblivion. There was only one chance. If they wanted to develop, they could only open up new sources of income. However, in order to open source, the most basic construction had to be done first. Only then could Huaishir use the unique conditions of the Dambwa district to discuss the next step of cooperation with the ancient corporation. Therefore, from the beginning of the reconstruction phase, the Dambwa inner circle faced only one dilemma. He had no money. In order not to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, the assets of the former alliance could not be sold off violently. Instead, a portion of funds had to be injected into them to tide them over. Therefore, the accounts of the alliance became very bleak. After the initial reconstruction, there was not much money left. If they wanted to find more money, they could only borrow. On this issue, Russell straightforwardly said that as a subordinate unit, the school could directly allocate funds for the reconstruction. It was not a problem for them to ask for as much as they wanted. However, this was not a healthy financial situation. If the campus became a long-term burden for the ivory tower, what was the need for it to exist? This was not the normal process. At this time, the most important thing was to go to the bank. Don't be afraid of debt. Don't be afraid of borrowing money. These days, the banks were crazy. With the current situation of the Dambwa inner circle, the more debt you had, the more money you borrowed, and the happier they would be. So what if the interest was high? They could pay it back slowly. With such a huge sunk cost, would the bank dare to ignore it? Just the name of the ivory tower was there. Huaishir had the opportunity to directly talk to the senior management of the major banks in the present. With the name of the Dambwa king above his head, a loan of less than 1 billion was just a matter of making a phone call. With Huaishir's stingy habit of 18 years, he still could not adapt to the dirty thinking of the adult world and the perverted ideas of the rich. When it came to borrowing money, he panicked. It was better to rob. There was no burden in his heart, and there was no need to pay it back. In the world of pleasure, there was money everywhere. If he got a few more votes, he would have everything. Just thinking about this, Huaishir could not help but want to rub his hands. If it were not for his physical condition, he would have picked up his axe and gone out to do a King job. In the front, Raymond, who was driving, suddenly felt a chill. When he looked back, he saw Huaishir in the back seat. His body was surrounded by black gas, and his eyes were scarlet, emitting bursts of cold frost. Be careful, the air conditioner is leaking. Sorry subconsciously. Huaishir reacted and tried to suppress the evil thoughts in his mind and calm down. It was the side effect of divinity going out of control. With the reconstruction of the Dambwa inner circle, great seeming stigmata in this land became closer and closer, and Huaishir's consciousness could even interfere with the outside world on a small scale. Specifically, when he wanted to do something bad, there would automatically be sound and light effects now that all his power was used to suppress the organization of the beast of eternal life in the ultimate, and his soul was deeply eroded by the sediment of hell. If he was not careful, his mind would easily slip. If he was not careful, he would go down the path of no return of murder and arson. This made Raymond, who was driving, panic. He raised his hand to touch his neck from time to make sure that his head was still there. However, when he looked at the side of the road, his attention was attracted. That little girl, is she the one that Mr. Isaac specially recruited? Raymond slowed down the car, subconsciously, and looked at the side of the road. She looks really conspicuous. Yes, once she gets excited, she will easily ignore the situation. This is also a weakness. Huaishir followed his gaze and could not help but sigh. In front of the train station that had just opened today, a girl carrying a bundle was hugging her friend and crying loudly, completely unaware of how many people were looking at her. Her name, I remember it's called, Makirimi? Huaishir was a little surprised. You know quite a lot about this. After all, she is a legendary genius. I was shocked when I heard about it. Raymond shrugged. It was found by the rescue team from the children's cries in the ruins. Outside the sealed door, corpses were scattered everywhere, and the tragic color of blood almost smeared the entire corridor red. After that, under the cleanup team's cleaning, a total of 17 fully armed personal guards were gathered from the hellish corridor. There was also a broken hunting angel. It was bitten to death. It was said that when it was found, the girl who was still alive was still biting the throat of the corpse, like a wolf, and hid the door behind her. Relying on her own strength, she protected her friend and 6 innocent children, and no one died in front of her. The price was that she was dying. It was said that the costs of the follow-up surgery and treatment were all paid by the vice president through the ivory tower. Through this treatment and the follow-up student loan, she was specially recruited. This was the first potential source of students from Dambwa Inner Circle, and she had excellent compatibility with celestial genealogy. According to observation, she was only 1 step away from the blessing ceremony, and her ghost mark could be transformed into a heroic spirit and become a member of the Dusk Road. From the perspective of talent, aptitude, potential, and even actual achievements, there was no reason to let such a talent leave celestial genealogy. Redmond's convoy had come this time not only to transport the framework core, but also to bring her along to complete the registration process as soon as possible. Otherwise, any undue delay might lead to trouble. Seemingly unintentionally, Raymond, who was driving, asked, "It's just that she has been asking about a person called Huaiji Suzi for the past few days. Do you have any clues?" Huaisher looked up and glanced at him. "You asked me, how would I know?" "Ahem. Isn't this quite like your name?" Raymond's eyes were filled with the light of gossip. "Is this a new stock entering the market? When I was undercover, I saw the news and randomly picked it." Huaisher calmly flipped through his phone. "Is everyone with the surname Huai related to me?" "You're right." Raymond thought for a moment, but he still couldn't find the connection between Huaisher and Huaiji Suzi. As a normal person, his train of thought didn't slide to women's clothing. It stopped at a place that was only 1 step away from the truth. He didn't notice that Huaisher secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Cold sweat broke out. I was almost exposed. The late autumn sea breeze blew on the pier, bringing a chill. The sun hanging above their heads didn't seem to have any warmth. Only their hands and feet felt cold. Beside the young man, a burly man with a scar on his face advised, "Mr. Lin, it's quite windy outside. Why don't you go back to the car and rest first? Just call me 19, Brother Shangya." The young man looked up and smiled innocently. "You're the right-hand man of the teacher. Please don't be so polite." "How can that be?" Shangya waved his hand and thought for a moment. Then, 19, King? That's fine too. Lin Shurjo nodded and continued to chat with Shangya. Then, he felt the evil power in his body rapidly expand and ascend. He felt that life was like a dream. Half a month ago, he was still living a good life in the ivory tower, bullying the weak and oppressing the kind. Then, with a sudden call from the teacher, he became the second-generation leader of Huaiji Group. He was doing well in school, but the teacher suddenly arranged for him to be an extreme boss in Yingzhou. Waiting online, quite urgent. Lin 19 didn't dare to compose a poem. Originally, he wanted to politely decline and say that it was difficult for him to take on such an important task, and that the teacher should find someone else. But when he saw the teacher again, he felt that something was different. Being stared at by that pair of eyes, he couldn't say any words of rejection. The only choice left was to nod. There was no other way. Chapter 797. By the time Lin 19 came back to his senses, he had already signed and made a military pledge to complete the task. Then he was stuffed into the Huaiji Group and raised a crow. It was just the teacher's task. Every time he thought of this, he felt happy even if he was a tool. Wasn't it good? In Huaisher's plan, the alliance could no longer continue to exist. Since it had returned to the light, the way of survival in the dark could no longer be retained. The order of the inner circle of Dambwa must be re-established. Not only the alliance, but the Huaiji Group was also bound to be restructured in the future and turned into a legal industry. But such a large alliance could not be dissolved overnight. Otherwise, who knew what kind of trouble the extreme Dao experts would cause if they lost control? Therefore, in this crucial period of transition, someone must replace Huaisher to take on the big responsibility and personally implement his will and orders. Yes, this person was Yuan Yuan. Yuan Yuan only felt a lot of pressure. As the future backbone of the family, at their age, they should have been involved in the management of the family's industry. It was just that far away in the ivory tower she and Lin 19 were temporarily absent from class. But they did not expect that the teacher would be so fierce and outrageous when it came to making up lessons. He casually threw such a big mess over to the Alliance. Although nominally they were assistants and secretaries, in fact, they were completely free. Even if they were tools, they would not be so outrageous. What's going on with him directly getting it done in one go? Even with the authority established by Huai Shi and the support from the family, she was still trembling with fear, as if she was treading on thin ice, for fear of accidentally causing trouble. Fortunately, she was responsible for the integration of the Alliance's industry on the surface. As for those involving violence and illegal things, they were all the work of Little 19. This kind of luxurious experience bag should not be given to her own students should she give it to outsiders. In any case, she was a member of the Lin family. No matter how bad she was better than anyone else. What's more, Little 19's talent was outstanding even in the Lin family. And there are all kinds of connections that others could not compare to. Just like now, in the afternoon at the port, the low noise of ship engines came from the distance. A dilapidated fishing boat slowly stopped next to the dock. After a glance, the person at the bow picked up the walkie-talkie and said something. Soon, a fat man wearing a silk robe ran out with a warm smile. 19, young master, why did you come here personally? He stepped on the pedals and jumped up, saying enthusiastically, you just have to tell us, and we'll send it over directly. Teacher, I'm just an errand boy. How can I dare to discount your words? Lin Sergio shook his head. Where is he? It's all packed. The man waved his hand behind him. Immediately, 2 huge barrels of gasoline slowly rolled out from the open cabin. They rolled along the footboard to the dock. After hitting the cement pier, the lids above fell off, revealing the figures curled up inside. Inside, a skinny man who was naked struggled to open his eyes and gasped for breath. In the other barrel was a man from the Russian Federation who was still struggling with a fierce look in his eyes. 19, young master, said that the 6th master has mobilized all his men these 2 days. The fat man smiled and said, one is hiding in Tsushima, and the other is hiding in the 4 northern islands. You can check. Daijin Guangzhou of the Iron King Gang and Yevgeny of the K-Club have all been sent back to you according to your request. There's no need to check. 6th great uncle has always been reliable. Lin Sergio did not even look. He just nodded and said, Mr. Wu, thanks 6th great uncle for me. Mr. Wu shook his head and smiled. He grabbed his hand intimately and said earnestly, don't say that. 6th master said that the whole family is happy that 19 young master is successful. In the future, the business of the 6E Club will depend on your support. Don't you think so? I'm just a young boy. How can I support it? Lin Sergio still smiled modestly. 6th great uncle is so powerful. It's the same whether I'm here or not. Mr. Wu heard and smiled even more enthusiastically. It's a family matter. We help each other. I'm just a student who works part-time. How can I make decisions for the teacher? Little Hut in the Woods replied, if 6th great uncle wants to, I'll definitely put in a good word for him in front of the teacher. Then I'll have to trouble you, 19 young master. Mr. Wu nodded respectfully and said goodbye, but Lin Sergio did not let go. He just looked at him with a smile. The fat man's movements stiffened for a moment. He was about to say something when he saw a box being handed over from behind Lin Sergio. I brought back some supplements from the ivory tower for great uncle. Little Hut in the Woods personally put the box into his hand and patted the back of his hand. Although it's not much, it's the thought that counts. I hope he won't mind. Even through the box, he could smell the alchemy coating on the source crystal. After weighing it with one hand, Mr. Wu's smile suddenly became more cheerful. Don't worry, we'll definitely show 19 young masters filial piety. He said, 6th master will definitely be happy too. Then, I won't see you off. Lin Sergio let go of his hand and waved goodbye. Take care, everyone. Mr. Wu picked up the box and carefully took 2 steps back. He quickly waved at the people in the cabin. He signaled for them to return. Just like that, Lin Sergio watched the fast boat depart. He stood on the shore and smoked a cigarette, which was rare for him. He rubbed his fingers together and pondered. Should he curse that damn fat man's head? Or should he give him something to remember him by? It could also be considered an answer to sixth great-uncle, so that he wouldn't be in such a hurry to reach his hands into his bowl. The little lotus had just shown its tip. Why was it that someone from his family was already thinking about it? The people of the Lin family had never been close to family. After leaving home, they followed the laws of Judas and pursued the authority of evil. They were never afraid of cannibalism. Sixth great-uncle was about to die of old age. Why was his nose still so sharp? Just as the alliance was about to change, he was already eyeing this fat piece of meat? Unfortunately, it wasn't time for him to fall out with sixth great-uncle yet. For the current Dan Bo, stability was more important than anything else. The Great Circle and the Six Directions Society couldn't be touched yet. But why should he, a tool, think about these things? Such a troublesome matter should be left to his teacher to deal with. If he could be lazy, he would be lazy. Touch. Forrest Hutt smacked his lips and crushed the curse that was spinning in his fingers. He turned around and walked towards the 2 barrels of gasoline in front of him. The empty barrels fell to the ground. 2 people rolled out of the barrels. They were held down by the people holding the paper ancestor. They couldn't move. Are they the people teacher wants? I confirmed it. It's these 2 bastards. Changye raised his head and wiped the blood off his fist. The 2 people on the ground were already a bloody mess. After losing the protection of their superiors, the once arrogant apex overlords hurriedly fled with their wealth. But in the end, they couldn't escape the final reckoning. Lin Shurgio squatted down and looked at the 2 terrified faces. He suddenly asked, "By the way, does the Alliance have any rules for dealing with this kind of thing?" When the head of the Heaven's Eye Society was still around, he would burn them to ashes and send them back. But boss, ahem, Mr. Huai sure didn't like such violent things. He just said that it was done. If that's the case, there's no need to trouble our teacher with this kind of small matter. Lin Shurju smiled. The curse between his fingers moved and turned into the projection of countless poisonous snakes. As a student, I have to find an opportunity to show off. In a daze, Daizo Hikaru's eyes widened. At that moment, darkness came. In the conference room, the meeting with the bank had already begun. Huaisher paused in the middle of his sentence. He picked up the phone on the table and glanced at it. Did something happen? The dwarf from the Magic Gold Bank asked curiously. No, nothing. Huaisher put down the phone. It's just a matter of the past. He said, let's continue. And so, the meeting continued. When the third meeting ended, Huaisher finally returned to the Stone Marrow Hall. It was already 10 o'clock at night. In the end, they didn't manage to reach a conclusion. The loan itself was a process of wrangling, especially when the Ingzhou branch of the Federal Bureau of Investigation wouldn't be a guarantor. How much money could he get by relying on the name of the Ivory Tower was a laborious job. In any case, Huaisher wasn't in a hurry. The funds in the account and the subsequent income from the Alliance's industries could last at least 2 or 3 months. It was far from being as urgent as others thought. Moreover, the current haggling was only because his side didn't have enough bargaining chips. As long as Huaisher was given enough time, he could put more things on his plate. When the time came, the weight on both sides of the balance would be reversed. It would be the bank begging him for a loan after a tiring day. He finally relaxed a little after eating Feng Shu's supper. He lay on the sofa and looked at the bracelet on his arm. It was still lit with a warning red light, reminding him that the ultimate beast of Eternal Life Organization was still in an unstable state. But when he turned on his phone and checked the detailed data, he found that the originally estimated 3 years had been shortened to a little more than 2 years and 9 months. Excluding the previous 1 month, the time had been shortened by 2 months. Tongyi was right. The correction value created by the construction and development of the Donbua Inner Circle had boosted Great Ming's destiny and replenished his weakened divinity, thus increasing the efficiency of the extermination. Just the initial stabilization had already shortened the estimated time by 6%. Huaisher was in disbelief. That black-hearted woman was actually reliable this time. Before he had time to show a trace of gratitude, he heard a familiar whisper in his ear without warning. Did someone secretly say something bad about me just now? Huaisher almost jumped up from the sofa in fright. He turned around and saw a familiar phantom slowly rising from under the sofa. Looking at his dull expression as if he had seen a ghost, she smiled happily. Ding! A bell that came out of nowhere in her hand made a crisp sound. The main mission has been updated. Chapter 798. In a long silence, Huaisher looked at her blankly. After a long while, he asked in confusion, "What's that?" "Main mission. Was there such a thing?" Huaisher widened his eyes. "I've never seen you give out a side mission. Is it inconvenient for you to understand?" "Old Fong, I want happy water and roasted chicken wings." As soon as she got home, she didn't hold back at all. She collapsed on the sofa and ordered supper. She even took out half a bag of potato chips from the cupboard. She had shrunk a lot. She almost turned into a cute version of herself. "I went on a long trip. I'm so tired. It's so troublesome." Tangi rolled on the sofa. "Home is still the best. I can eat and sleep. The happy water even fills me up." Huaisher held the cup numbly and took a sip expressionlessly. He really didn't want to remind her. "This is my King home." He rolled his eyes and asked, "So, did you get anything from the trip?" "Nothing at all. The outside world is so cold. Even the happy water is exhaling. Only Old Fong's roasted chicken wings are warm." Tangi lay on the sofa and looked at Fong Shu operating the oven in the kitchen. She rubbed her hands in anticipation. Huaisher originally wanted to ask her if she could think of anything other than food. But after thinking about it, he realized that she really could. In order to prevent her from thinking about anything else, he could only force the topic back on track. "So, main mission. What's the main mission?" "It's about our great advancement." Tangi flipped over from the sofa and made her cute version of herself in a very charming position. It was as if she had entered into a commentary mode. "Level 3 Great Si Ming sounds awesome, but he's still a level 3. Those below level 4 are cannon fodder and crafting tools. Even if you have divinity protecting you, you still have to answer when a missile comes. The War of the Worlds is on the way. You have to hurry up and improve." The War of the Worlds was a great war in hell that came with the tide of the abyss. Almost all of the infernal realm above the Silent Zone was involved in a large-scale turmoil, which could almost be called an abyssal insurrection. Under the influence of the tide, which was once in 100 years, the depths of all hells would undergo drastic changes. Living together and separating, when the time came, all territories and territories would be reorganized. Meanwhile, the slaughter between the countless abyssal forces would push this bitter struggle to its climax. At the same time, it was also the time when the pressure from the 3 great seals was the greatest. In order to maintain the stability of the present world, the Astronomical Association and the various major lineages would also participate in this dispute. Even without mentioning the long list of titles, Huaisher, as the recently popular fried chicken of the Ivory Tower, could not avoid this. Tangi replied, "According to the Continuation Court's estimates, the prelude to the War of the Worlds will begin in about half a year's time. At that time, the rulers will most likely start a new round of war." Huaisher calmly held his teacup and said, "But what does this have to do with my little Huaisher from the Ivory Tower? I have turned over a new leaf and am now teaching and educating people. Benefactress, please return." "Are you sure?" Tangi looked at him with a faint smile. "I don't mind, but the situation is more important than the person, you understand?" Huaisher rolled his eyes. Tangi was right. When the time came, Huaisher would probably be involved in all kinds of situations, even if he was unwilling. Moreover, maintaining popularity came with a price, whether it was the idle business or other things. He had to be prepared early. Aren't I still enduring and waiting for the 3-year promise? So, the most important thing now is to deal with the reconstruction of the Doomsday Inner Circle. This will be good for you, the Doomsday Inner Circle and the Ivory Tower. The strengthening of the Doomsday Inner Circle would be corrected, and the growth of the Great Arbiter of Destiny would restore Huaisher's incomplete divinity, speeding up the killing in the ultimate. The faster it was done, the sooner it was done, the better Huaisher's condition would be. Then, you can prepare for Yun Zhongjuan's advancement ceremony. Tangi reminded him abruptly. Huaisher shuddered. It's time to spend money again. He was panicking. "Don't worry. Don't worry, you're not the same as before. Tangi comforted him. Look at you. You made a fortune in Ingzhou, your business is doing so well, your life is not bad, and the Ivory Tower and the Astronomy Association are protecting you. It was a nice thing to say, but he felt that something was not quite right. Was there a second half that this bad thing did not say? In short, a little bit of money is not a problem at all. Tangi patted his shoulder and comforted him. With your level of corruption, no one will be able to tell that you're faking the accounts. Do I need it? Isn't this just an example, right? Tangi said, it's not like I'm asking you to embezzle. Let's get down to business. Huaishir sighed and took out a small notebook. What should I spend money on next? The others are not expensive, but there are a few things that are not easy to get. Tangi pondered for a moment and said, first of all, money. Large amounts of source crystals and alchemy materials are indispensable. These should not be a problem. I can get them with just my face. Huaishir said, just tell me the things that are not easy to get. Then here's the problem. Tangi shrugged. There are a total of 2 rank 4 on the road of Heaven's Inquisition. The great Ximing that grew from young Ximing, and the Yunzhongjuan that grew from Xiangjun. But you're already a rank 3 great Ximing. It's not realistic to rely on the divinity of great Ximing to break through to rank 4. So the only path left is Yunzhongjuan. But this is where the problem lies. You don't have Xiangjun's sacred mark in your body. Huaishir. Huaishir was stunned. Only then did he realize what the problem was. That's right, he turned from an Yin soul into a Li soul, then into a mountain ghost, and then into a young Ximing. Originally, he should have become a great Ximing as a rank 4, but he used the opportunity in advance. Then there was only one other path left. Li's soul into Hebo, into Xiangjun, and finally into the true Yunzhongjuan. But now that he was a great Ximing, how could he erase his sacred mark and delete his account for this? Now you regret using up Huai Zisuzi's divine mark, right? Tangi gloated. Originally, the substitute not only helped you withstand the pressure of divinity and the corrosion of hell, but also carried the power of great Ximing, so that your original body could cultivate Xiangjun's sacred mark from the beginning. But in the end, it was used as a consumable by you. Now that you want to use it, are you blind? Do you regret it? Huaishir rolled his eyes. He did not want to talk to her. Then what should we do? He said, let's just go to bed. I haven't seen you for a few days, and you've become so unrestrained? Tangi was stunned, and said with a complicated expression, Huaishir, I'm not such a casual woman. At least, don't we have to cultivate feelings first? Let's start by holding hands, okay? Huaishir took a deep breath and put the axe of wrath back in. He restrained his impulse to kill this black-hearted woman and tried hard to squeeze out a gentle smile. Can we talk about something serious? You were the one who was not serious first. Yes, it's me. I was wrong. Huaishir lowered his head and begged. Please, let's talk about something serious. Okay? Okay. Tangi sighed helplessly and magnanimously forgave Huaishir's little mistake. After all, she was a good person. It's not that there's no way. Look, you planted watermelons in your field, and there's no place to plant cabbages, but that doesn't stop you from getting other people's cabbages. What are you talking about? The stigmata relic. Tangi said lightly, since you can't get Xiangjuan's stigmata, you can get her stigmata relic directly, right? The only difference is whether it's in your body or not. This is the easiest thing to get, and there must be some in the Ivory Tower's inventory. It's just a matter of whether it's suitable or not. Even if there's no suitable one, Russell must have searched all over the world for it. Xiangjuan and Great Ximing are both miraculous crystals of the road of Heaven's Inquisition, and they have always been compatible. When the time comes, it'll be like a USB flash drive. Isn't it good to plug it in and use it? Xiangjuan stigmata was not the most difficult thing to get. The most difficult thing was the way for Xiangjuan to become Yunzhongjuan and the materials needed. The stigmata relic was only the prerequisite. The external conditions were more demanding, and it required a catastrophic rainstorm that lasted for more than 7 days. Also, there were precious materials that contained the destiny and divinity of the sea and the sky. The process of ascension from the ground to the clouds was extremely difficult. not to mention the way to merge the stigmata of Yun Zhongjuan and Great Si Ming into the same soul. There's a way to find Xiangjuan's stigmata relic. Don't worry, just wait. Although it's difficult to find a disaster rainstorm that lasts for more than 7 days, it's not impossible to find. Unfortunately, it must be limited to the current situation. Otherwise, there are plenty of places in the border that have rainfall all year round. Tongyi concluded, there are only 2 things you need to pay attention to: the divinity materials needed for Xiangjuan to become Yun Zhongjuan, and the remaining crystals of the Spring of Light. These 2 things, one is related to the achievement of Yun Zhongjuan, and the other is related to the fusion of Yun Zhongjuan and Great Si Ming. Both of them must be discovered by you, and they are necessities related to your destiny. Understood? I have to work hard again, right? Huaisher couldn't help but have a headache after remembering the important things. What's the Spring of Light? Where is it? It's said to be the last relic left from the Age of Gods, and its location is extremely confidential. How would I know where it is? Tongyi shrugged calmly. Isn't it because you've been too lazy recently, so I've arranged a long-term goal for you. The most important thing now is to settle the inner circle of Dombo first. Work hard to improve the happiness of the residents and become a qualified player of SimCity. The steaming hot chicken wings were finally served on the table. Tongyi beamed with joy and then glanced at Huaisher. But be careful, someone wants to share the cake. She sniffed the rich aroma on the plate and sighed softly. After all, although not everyone knows how to plant trees, when the fruit is good, everyone wants to take a share. Huaisher looked down at the email notification that popped up on his phone. He raised his eyebrows. He didn't say anything. Chapter 799. At midnight, Shiro Ueno, the department manager of the Huai Paper Group, was arrested and searched by the Metropolitan Police Department because he was involved in a murder case. At 2 o'clock, Lin Sergio, who had received the news, hurried over with his lawyer. He sat in the office of the Metropolitan Police Department and looked down at the cheap coffee in front of him. He then looked up at the class director in front of him. Our Huai Paper Construction is a mature and legal construction company under the Huai Paper Group. As a department manager, Shiro Ueno's character is well known and has won the unanimous praise of his colleagues. For so many years, he has been conscientious, hardworking. His down-to-earth, sincere, gentle, and kind character has been recognized by everyone. Now that he has suffered such an unjust injustice, our society will definitely not turn a blind eye to it. At the end of the day, it's all because the Metropolitan Police Department made a mistake, which led to the current situation. I don't know if there's a mistake, but I've heard of Shiro Ueno many times. The class director calmly drank his coffee. He's a shark man. He's very fierce and powerful. He's been imprisoned twice for violent activities and has been involved in countless crimes. He was originally a general of the Fujimoto Group, but now he's the confidant of your Huai Paper Group's leader. I know this very well. There's no need for you to introduce him to me. I don't know what you're talking about. Forrest Hutt looked behind him. This is our company's lawyer, Karaki. We request to meet with Shiro Ueno immediately. Sorry, Shiro Ueno is currently being examined. The class director replied. Our examination department has extracted blood traces from his hand. He's a major suspect. Karaki pushed up his glasses. As a construction company, injuries and disasters are inevitable. Manager Ueno often leads the workers on the front lines. An occasional injury to his hand isn't a big deal, and it doesn't mean anything. We've extracted the DNA of 2 victims from the blood traces. When the construction materials were being transported, the bodies of cats and dogs were found on the roadside. Shouldn't they be moved to the side? Karaki looked at the watch on his wrist. You have no right to stop me from meeting my client. I suspect that you're using torture to extort a confession from him for your own performance. You're trying to frame him and other unspeakable motives. Are you trying to scare me? Karaki, you don't have to put a hat on me. I've seen a lot of scumbag lawyers like you who defend gangs for money. The dean sneered and picked up his phone to say a few words. Soon, there was a knock on the door. The handcuffed Ueno was escorted in and sat on a chair. Aren't you going to meet? He's here. You can meet him for as long as you want, and you can say whatever you want. The dean put down the cup in his hand. The Metropolitan Police Department has enough coffee today. No matter how much swill there is, it's not something that can be eaten, sir. The cabin in the forest said indifferently, "You keep saying that we are scum, but the things you do are not much better than scum. That's where the problem lies." The provost shrugged and straightened his back from his chair. He leaned forward and sneered. "Even if we are scum, we are still legal scum. Don't compare me to a bunch of gutter rats like you. The Metropolitan Police Department is a place that specializes in dealing with trash like you. The coffee in the Metropolitan Police Department is specifically used to feed scum like you swill. Rats can only eat swill, so don't think about eating other things." "Is that so?" Lynn Sergio was expressionless. "You seem to have nothing to fear. Is there someone behind you?" "It doesn't matter. Maybe you have a strong background, but you definitely don't know who I am." He shrugged slightly and said regretfully, "Otherwise, you definitely wouldn't dare to talk to me like this." At 10 o'clock in the morning, the new issue of the Twilight News suddenly reported that the Metropolitan Police Department was investigating the provost of the third provost for accepting bribes and being involved in several murder cases. Under the influence of the mastermind behind the scenes, the news began to spread like wildfire. In the afternoon of the same day, Huaisha finally met an unscheduled guest in his office. In the current era, an old man with a head full of white hair was sitting on his sofa, wearing an old-fashioned Ingzhou robe. On the ring on his index finger was the emblem of the Danyi family, representing the identity of the visitor. He was a member of the Chinese Danyi family from the Looming Mansion. On the business card was the title of the Metropolitan Police Department security officer. In the MPD, the security officer was responsible for the security of the Imperial Palace. It could be said that it was the backbone of the government. Doera Shengjian. Only black tea can do it. Huaisha sat opposite him and motioned for his secretary to make tea. After the greetings, he wasn't in a hurry to speak. He sat calmly and waited for the old man opposite him to speak. Soon, the tea was served. "It's good tea." Doera Shengjian sighed. "Yes, it's suitable for old people. Drink more and don't have to be afraid of insomnia." Huaisha said to his secretary, "When you leave later, bring a few kilograms back for Mr. Doera. There's no need for tea. It's better to drink plain water when you're old." Doera raised his eyes and looked over, suddenly saying, "This time, you've gone too far, Huaisha. I'm also in a difficult position." "Sorry, I don't quite understand what you're talking about." Huaisha's expression didn't change. Behind Doera, the attendant opened a document bag and pushed the investigation of the crime scene and photos in front of Huaisha. Daizo Kosho and Yevgeny both died in front of their general's old residence. They were nailed to the door and died of blood loss. Doera asked, "Do you have any clues?" "I'm not sure. I've never seen these two people before." Huaisha shrugged regretfully. "You should know my style. I don't like to leave people with intact corpses. However, since these two people are dead, I think they most likely died for a reason, right? To tell you the truth, after I heard about it, I can eat 2 more bowls of rice tonight and add an extra dish." "Don't talk about that nonsense, Huaisha-kun. Everyone knows who did this." Doera sighed. "You've broken the balance. The underworld of Kyoto is already chaotic enough. To be honest, I thought that the high and mighty Looming Hall wouldn't care about the life and death of rats." Huaisha calmly replied, "Isn't punishing evil and promoting good the obligation of Kyoto citizens? Looming Hall should really give such a kind person a banner." "A banner? That kind of thing, you can have as many sides as you want." Doera suddenly laughed. "I didn't come today to criticize you, Mr. Huaisha. We don't want to make things too stiff with our neighbors. Entrepreneur of the Year, Honorary Senator, these can all be considered. With your achievements, you can even have the Emperor award you a medal. As long as you want, it doesn't matter even if you have a position in Looming Hall. You already did this in the rookie competition, right? Sorry, things have changed with the passage of time. I'm not interested." Huaisha held his chin and lazily replied, "I think it's pretty good to lead the Ivory Tower. You see, at least I'm in charge of such a large area right now. I'm too busy. There are also many people to feed, right?" Doera said, "In my opinion, The Alliance doesn't need to give up its current advantage, right? We don't mind the Alliance expanding its territory. A stable underground world is also something we're happy to see. He paused for a moment and said meaningfully, we can even help build the Donbwa district. After all, we're both on Ingzhou land. We have to help each other. It's always been to persuade prostitutes to turn over a new leaf. Where's the logic of persuading people to do evil, Mr. Doera? After a long silence, Huaisher sighed and raised his head. This isn't the way to hitch a ride, right? Doera smiled. We're both in Ingzhou. We're just looking for cooperation. Huaisher asked expressionlessly, what if I don't need cooperation? After a short silence, Doera sighed. If you're too domineering, you won't have friends, Huaisher-kun. It doesn't matter. Huaisher said, I've never had many friends. Doera thought for a moment and seriously told him, without friends, it's hard to move an inch. Huaisher smiled. In the silence, he slowly raised his hand and opened the blinds beside him, letting in the dazzling sunlight to show the noisy scene in the inner circle of Donbwa. Do you see the road outside, Mr. Doera? Huaisher asked doubtfully. It's so flat and spacious. As long as you don't get lost, how can it be difficult to walk? As he spoke, his smile became gentler and indescribably brilliant. But his eyes became dark, and it was difficult to restrain the evil thoughts surging in his soul. Wisps of blood appeared in his eyes. The road led to the sky. If I don't want to go to Rome, I can go to other places. You can do whatever you want as long as you don't block my way. Don't even think about it. In the silence, the corner of Doera's eyes twitched. Soon he sighed helplessly. Then we have nothing to talk about. The old man slowly got up and patted the dust on his knees. I wish you a safe journey, Mr. Huaisher. I wish you good health too. Huaisher smiled and got up to send him off. I also hope that the people we care about will be safe and sound. Doera's footsteps paused for a moment. He finally raised his turbid eyes and looked at Huaisher. The two pairs of eyes looked at each other for a long time. Then they nodded in silence. I believe you will. He closed the door behind him and walked away. In the silence, the cold tea reflected a dark red light in the afternoon sun. Huaisher leaned on the sofa, the heavy pen spinning silently at his fingertips. His expression was indifferent. Sensei, Mr. Ueno has been granted bail. Soon, a call came from Forest Hut. But he can't leave the country or leave the present. He has to be ready to cooperate with their investigation at any time. Okay, I understand. Thank you for your hard work. Also, Sensei, Forest Hut hesitated for a moment. My sixth granduncle might not have any good intentions. The Six Directions Association has investigated this matter more than once, so I'm quite clear about this. Huaisher replied, Don't worry. If I didn't trust you, I wouldn't have put you in that position. After hanging up the phone, Huaisher returned to his desk and looked down at the notepad in front of him. After a long time, he raised his hand and crossed out a few of the lines. In fact, there was nothing wrong with a win-win cooperation. But on what basis? At this point, they still came to the door with a show of strength, hoping that Donbwa Inner Circle would be their rat and eat the swill they gave them. In their dreams, for a long time, the leaders of the Alliance had put in so much effort to lay the foundation and pave the road for the arrival of this day. They couldn't turn back to the past just because someone was blocking in front of them, right? Want to cooperate? Of course, if Donbwa Inner Circle wanted to grow, they couldn't eat alone. Everyone had to make money for the business to last. But there were so many people in the world who could cooperate with me. Why would I choose your looming hall? Huaisher sneered. Do you really think you have me? Chapter 800. Did he really think that the Ivory Tower's methods would work in Ingzhou? In the car that left, Tatora Seiji hung up the phone and sneered. Soon, the phone lit up again. Mr. Tatora, this is the Inner Palace. A low voice came from the phone. How did Mr. Huaisher respond? In the end, he's still a young man who doesn't care about anyone else. His aggressive personality can't be changed without some setbacks. That style will only make him lose the favor of more people. Tatora Seiji replied. As you expected, he's not easy to get in touch with. It seems that he's Russell's student. The Inner Palace sighed on the other end of the phone. He's exactly the same as Russell 50 years ago. He's aggressive and never leaves any leeway. But Dombo's matters can't be solved with aggression. No matter how great the Ivory Tower's authority is, if they want to use it on Ingzhou's soil, they have to be discounted. Now, if the now was so easy to settle down, we wouldn't have to wait until today. Although the now was big, there wasn't an inch of extra land. This wasn't something that could be solved with murder and arson. Blindly arrogant and arrogant, not knowing how to compromise and cooperate, would only lead to self-destruction. Moreover, this was the capital, an important town in the Ingzhou pedigree. How could they allow an outsider to be so domineering? Do we need to take further action? Tatoru Seiji asked. There's no need. The inner palace said. Dombo's inner circle is already a foregone conclusion. We don't need to go against the Astronomy Association, and we don't need to let people talk about us. He said, we don't need to oppose. As long as we don't support him, he won't be able to do anything. The phone hung up. Tatoru Seiji closed his eyes and didn't say anything. Gradually, they went further and further away. For Huaishur, friction with the Ingzhou pedigree was to be expected. In the heart of the Ingzhou pedigree in the capital, if an organization wanted to exist, they couldn't avoid dealing with the Ingzhou pedigree. In fact, in the original plan, even if they wanted to cooperate, Huaishur could pinch his nose and bear with it. But cooperation wasn't the way to cooperate. First of all, it had to be based on the premise that both sides were equal. It couldn't be a condescending gift or have ulterior motives. The way to cooperate was to have a clear priority. Otherwise, it would just be one-sided oppression and control. If they were to cooperate today, wouldn't the looming hall be protected by troops tomorrow? Was the Dombo inner circle going to pay for the military expenses the day after tomorrow? If there was any friction the day after tomorrow, would the inner circle of Dombo need to put in more effort and sweat? In your King dreams. If that really happened, Huaishur would rather throw his face into the abyss and stay in Xian High for the rest of his life. He was ready to trip up the looming hall. However, his opponent's speed seemed to be faster than he had imagined. The next morning, he received a message from the bank. The loan process was hindered. Among the lending banks, an East Asia Changtong Bank suddenly proposed a suspension of negotiations. The reason was that due to the recent changes in the exchange rate between pure gold and spirit crystals, which led to the continuous contraction of trade between the Asian border and other sudden situations, they needed to reevaluate the prospects of the Dombo Inner Circle. Due to the huge amount of loans required by the Dombo Inner Circle, they used the method of syndication loans. It was not a single bank, but a group of 7 banks led by the Magic Gold Bank and the Archean Fund. They shared the risks and provided loans to the Dombo Inner Circle. At this moment, the Changtong Bank suddenly proposed to re-examine the evaluation information of the Dombo Inner Circle, which immediately interrupted the original negotiation process and put the loan on hold. In this international bank headquartered in Jakarta, the shareholders who held more than 20% of the shares were the Sakai conglomerate, and the actual controller behind the Sakai conglomerate was self-evident. You're in a hurry to trip me up so soon. Huaishur was amused. I'm sorry, Mr. Huaishur. The agent of the Magic Gold Bank shrugged helplessly. According to the procedure, they have the right to do so. If they insist on pestering you, your loan this time will be delayed for a long time, and we can't do anything about it. It was not that they could not do anything, but that they were unwilling to do anything. Only if Huaishur lowered her head would they be able to negotiate better terms. It's okay. I believe that the future is always bright, right? Huaishur replied with a smile. On behalf of the Dombo Inner Circle, I sincerely welcome your evaluation. It's only right for such a large sum of money. The dwarf of the Magic Gold Bank nodded. He could not tell whether Huaishur was speaking the truth or not, but it did not matter. Since an ally jumped out to attract the fire, they were happy to take advantage of it. With the size of the Magic Gold Bank, if Changtong could take a bite, they could take more than 3. Why wouldn't he do it? Then, I wish you all the best. He politely said goodbye. In less than 2 hours, the rumor of the loan failure appeared out of thin air and spread to the entire Dombo Inner Circle and even Kyoto. It was as if it had grown legs and set off a new storm out of thin air. In an interview with the Tomorrow News, the spokesperson of the Archean Fund personally admitted to re-examining the prospects of the Dambwa inner circle and re-evaluating the news. After that, the stocks of the allied industries, including Jingtong Electronics, began a new round of plunging. In a place like Yingzhou, where the stock market was like stagnant water for thousands of years, it was simply a miracle. It was just that no one wanted this kind of miracle. It was not just the investors. Soon, panic spread to the streets, and everyone was in a state of panic. That bastard Huai paperman had finished eating, drinking, and gambling. He had embezzled 1 billion yuan and was going to run away with his 9 sisters-in-law. Rumors spread like wildfire. Refute the rumors? Huaisher looked at the foot of the mountain in confusion. Why refute the rumors? There's no need. But if we let it go, what will happen if we let it go? Huaisher asked back. If they let it go, it would definitely cause turmoil, and there would be many seeds of chaos sprouting. These were self-evident things. But aren't some people mistaken? Huaisher said softly, I am the leader of the alliance. I am the current king of Dambwa. I came here to change everything for the better. I have already done so much at the foot of the mountain, but why do some people still think that I owe them? The foot of the mountain was silent, not daring to speak, and sweating profusely. Recently, with the changes in life, the impetuous atmosphere in the inner circle of Dambwa was also rising visibly. Many people even began to call for more benefits and better treatment in the name of equality and justice. They even felt that the current changes were not enough and wanted better. But in fact, the changes in the inner circle of Dambwa had never had anything to do with them. They had never even added a brick or tile to it. More people grasped the opportunity and began to work hard and struggle day and night. They were just waiting for the boat under their butts to move on its own. For Huaisher, this was not insatiable greed, and he did not feel betrayed. If it was human nature to love ease and hate work, then the bad atmosphere left behind by the inner circle of Dambwa was far more than that. It was easy to change mountains and rivers, but hard to change one's nature. After getting used to the tragic life of the strong preying on the weak, there would always be some things left behind with pain and lessons. In fact, Huaisher was very surprised that things had come to this point. There were even some people spontaneously defending Huaisher's reputation. Even the construction on the site and the work in other places were not affected at all. The inner circle of Dambwa was still operating as usual. So, we really can't let it go any longer. Huaisher stared out of the window at the noisy construction scene under the night sky. At least we can't let down those who trust us, right? It was true that some people were incurable, but this was not a reason to give up on more people. For the time being, there's no need to rush to refute the rumors. We just need to find those who forget who they are for a little money. If they don't like it here, there's no need to force them to stay. The world is so big, there's always a place that can satisfy them. Huaisher thought for a moment and said seriously, You work hard these days. Just keep an eye on it and maintain order. Remember, as long as there's no big trouble, the Huaisher group is not allowed to do anything. Understand? I know that some people are used to the life of the violent group, but violence is an outward weapon, not an inward tool. Times have changed, and so have the rules. Yamashita nodded respectfully. You've emphasized it many times, and the other members and I have kept it in mind. Very good. Huaisher nodded and said, Help me call Little 19 over. I have something to say to him. Yamashita was right. At this juncture, they had to do something. For hours later, late at night, in the heart of the bustling streets of Kobe, the headquarters of the 6He Association was located. After 4 years, the cabin in the woods finally saw his 6th granduncle again. The legendary old dragon didn't look old at all. Rather, he was too young, as if he was only a few years older than him. His face was handsome, but his body was shockingly thin, as if he was just skin and bones. His white hair was mottled, and his eyes were dark, without any white. Lin Wei was not afraid. As the half-brother of the current Torch Dragon, he was already 92 years old. Under his leadership, the 6He Association gradually developed into a smuggling organization that covered the entire East Asia and even infiltrated parts of America. Many people would have nightmares when they saw his gloomy face. Now, he was full of a warm smile. "Little 19 is here? Why didn't you say so earlier?" The old man waved enthusiastically. "Come, let Six Granduncle take a look." The cabin in the woods walked forward and smiled, allowing the old man to raise his hand and touch his shoulders and bones, just like when he was a child. "You've become much stronger, little 19. Sixth Granduncle smiled with relief. "With your bones, you can live a long life, unlike your brother. Unfortunately, the back of your head is not peaceful," he said. "You're rebellious." When he smiled, his smile was ferocious, and he looked down at the boy in front of him. The boy was also looking at him. Chapter 801. If you want to be successful, you have to learn from Sixth Granduncle. Letting evil karma's claws press on his vital parts, 19 answered calmly. "I also want to live a long life like Sixth Granduncle." "Ha ha, well said. Don't you have to live a long life to enjoy glory and wealth?" Sixth Granduncle laughed, loosened his hand, and patted him on the shoulder. "What a good boy. Since you are here, you should stay for a few more days and let Sixth Granduncle entertain you well. Just tell me what you want. There is nothing that Sixth Granduncle can't enjoy. I don't mind staying for a few more days." Lin 19 shrugged. "But in fact, I'm just a messenger. Sixth Granduncle, if you want to entertain me, you have to let me finish my words." "What is it? Let 19 deliver it in person." Sixth Granduncle scratched his chin. "Let me hear it. Go ahead." Little Hut in the Woods said, "Teacher wants to see you." "Oh, I see." Sixth Granduncle waved his hand casually and motioned his subordinate to come over. "You know 19, right? He's my good boy. It is rare for him to come here. Treat him well. Let his cousin take him to play for a few more days. Don't do anything bad." The subordinate nodded respectfully and gestured to Little Hut in the Woods. 19 child, this way please." Little Hut in the Woods stood still. "Sixth Granduncle, I have delivered the message. Shouldn't you give me a reply? You said you wanted to deliver the message. I'll listen to it. But when did I say I would reply to him?" Sixth Granduncle was puzzled and asked back. He was amused. "You want to see me? There are many people in the world who want to see me." 19 said he wants to see me. "Does he want to ask a little girl to come out in a KTV? Sorry, I have never been to that kind of KTV, so I don't know which one is more difficult." Outside the door, there was a knock on the door. The young man who pushed the door and raised his head and smiled. "But I'm already here. Mr. Lin, don't you even want to take a look at me?" In this way, he went deep into the heart of the 6He gang without anyone else around. He casually took off the top hat on his head and placed it in the hands of the guard in front of the door. He held the collar of his suit and looked around as if he had never seen this place before. Everything was new to him. His Sixth Granduncle's smile did not change, but the darkness in his eyes was surging. He looked like a prey staring at food in front of him, and he could not help but mock him. "You actually dare to come? Old Mr. Lin is already so old. You can't possibly go to Domboy to see me, right? That's not good. We have to respect the elderly." Huaishir calmly replied, "Besides, I am a third-class military officer of the Astronomical Association. This is the modern realm, so why would I not dare to come?" "Ha ha 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 ha." The old man was amused. He looked around in disbelief and pointed at the defenseless man in front of him. "Do you see that? Is there anyone in the world who would use a pin to poke a hole in Renee's neck and still parade around with the title of a military officer? Isn't it normal to have an office dispute?" Huaishir explained helplessly, "This is the bad thing about working in a public institution. There are always people who you can't help but want to kill, but you can't kill them. You can only pretend not to see each other when you see each other." His Sixth Granduncle held his chin and looked at the young man in front of him. "Do you think I care about the identity of a third-class military officer? I don't care. Since I'm here, there's nothing to lose by chatting with each other." Huaishir walked forward step by step until he was in front of his Sixth Granduncle. He raised his hand and ordered the subordinate next to the old man. "Don't you have any discerning eyes? Bring a chair over. Don't let people say that you don't even know the basic etiquette." In the silence, Everyone's expression was very ugly. Only his sixth granduncle's expression did not change. He glanced indifferently at Huaishur in front of him and waved his hand. Give him a chair. He is a guest, so he should have a place to sit. That's great. Huaishur sat in the chair in front of the old man. Without his order, someone quickly brought a table over and served tea and hot water. You've seen the noodles. You've also taken a seat. Now the tea for the guest is also here. Mr. Huaishur, if you want etiquette, I'll give you etiquette now. I just hope you can accept it. Lin Wei raised his hand fearlessly, rolled up the hem of his sleeves, picked up the boiling water in the mud pot, and personally washed the teapot and teacups. He poured the tea and washed the tea meticulously. From beginning to end, he did not say a word. The evil thoughts in the fire boiled and emitted a piercing, murderous intent, dyeing the tea red like blood. In the end, he picked up the teacup in front of him. Tea, please. Huaishur also picked up the teacup and drank it in one gulp. The pain, like a sharp blade cutting his throat, entered his stomach along with the tea, quickly spreading and disappearing. The murderous intent entered his throat and quickly dissipated in the ultimate, leaving only the real and illusory pain. He poured the water and served the tea. The old man picked up the teacup again. Tea, please. The green tea was full of fierce poison. When it entered Huaishur's throat, not a single drop was left. Tea was served again. Tea, please. This time, some unknown disaster was brewing in the pitch-black tea, making one's hair stand on end. Lin Shurjiu took a step back. Huaishur reached out, picked up the teacup, and drank it in one gulp. After 3 rounds of tea, the tea leaves in the pot had lost their color. Even if it was boiled fiercely, there was no trace of flavor left. The tea that was enough to drown and curse an entire block of people to death had been drunk. Good tea. Huaishur smacked his lips, savoring the thick sweetness in his throat, and sighed happily. I haven't drunk such good tea in a long time. If it was any other third order here, they would have died suddenly. Even fourth order ones would not dare to casually swallow such a fierce poison. Huaishur did not know that this sixth granduncle of the little house in the forest was also an abyss-cooking demon, and he was quite accomplished. Unfortunately, he encountered the organization of the beasts of eternal life in the ultimate. No matter how fierce the poison curse was, it was useless. As expected of the king of Dombwa, your etiquette is thorough. Sixth granduncle looked deeply at Huaishur and said, Now, Mr. Huaishur, you can tell us why you are here. Did I not come here at Mr. Lin's invitation? Huaishur smiled. He picked up the teapot on the clay pot, poured boiling water, and said casually, I'm not afraid of being laughed at, but I'm a poor, narrow-minded, and stingy person. After earning a few bucks, I don't know my own worth. It's easy for me to become arrogant. I have the heart to become rich, but I don't have the life to become rich. He said, I don't really want to earn some money, but that doesn't stop others from taking over. Saying this, Huaishur tipped the teapot, poured out 2 cups of amber-colored tea from the tasteless tea leaves, and raised the teacups. Please have the tea, he said. Behind the tea table, the old man expressionlessly reached out and picked up the teacup in front of him. The evil destiny in his body surged like lava, bursting out a deep and subtle echo. He raised his head and drank it in one gulp. He put down the empty teacup in his hand. Safe and sound. But then, the stone bricks under his feet quickly decayed. Countless fine, poisonous plants and flowers grew out of the cracks, then quickly withered and disappeared. Good tea. He tasted the remaining wisp of vitality from the mountain ghost in his mouth and shook his head. It's a pity that it's still lacking in flavor and stamina. How can it compare to the years of effort of the senior? Huaishur smiled. On the tea table, the mighty and ferocious Pishio tea pet in the corner suddenly shook and silently cracked open a crack. This made the old man's expression gloomy. It was slightly better. I know that the alliance is so big that you covet it, but it doesn't matter. These are all things that I don't want to keep. It doesn't matter if the Sixth Direction Society wants to take it or even take a step further. Huaishur turned the empty teacup in his hand and suddenly said, In the current capital, the Iron King Gang, the K Gang, the Company of Fools, all the established extreme Tao groups have been defeated. Only the Great Circle and the Six Direction Society still have strength. Isn't this a good opportunity? He said, now is the time to dominate the capital, Mr. Lin. Sounds good, the old man said coldly, not even bothering to lift his eyelids. It sounds like sleep talking. Yes, it's like a dream. Huai sure shrugged. That's why the world is sometimes too fantastical. Even the underworld has a glass ceiling. No matter how strong the Six Direction Society is, they are unreliable foreigners to the Yingzhou system. They can only wander around the periphery and can't really enter the core. As long as the Yingzhou system existed, it was impossible to allow a group of foreigners to form an illegal group in the capital. This was a matter of course. Even the once insufferably arrogant K-Gang was just one of the channels used by the financial giants to launder money. The Iron King Gang was simply a dog of the government, a shit-stirrer supported by the looming hall. But today is different from the past, Mr. Lin. Huaisher spread his hands. And I'm here on behalf of the Alliance, aren't I? The Alliance has decided to collectively transform, but there are definitely some people who can't walk under the sun. Instead of letting the scum and the name of the Alliance be buried together, it's better to keep their lives and create some value with the Alliance. It's also the last bit of mercy the General President, have for them. Lin Wei was not afraid of being amused. In other words, you're selling off the bad assets and still expect me to pay a high price for you. Huaisher? What's the saying? Both sides benefit, Huaisher replied calmly. Isn't that what the Six Direction Society lacks? Time is precious, Mr. Lin. The opportunity to enter the local market is right in front of you. If you're decisive enough, before the looming hall cultivates a new black glove, we can at least take half of the market. If we give up some more, we can at least keep a third of the capital. A third of the capital, that is to say, for districts. At that time, the Alliance is just a name, and the Six Direction Society will get actual benefits that are not discounted. What we need to pay is just a small share of the profits according to the share. Lin Wei was not afraid. He widened his eyes in shock and couldn't help laughing. Laughing loudly. Laughing so hard that tears almost came out. Just for a name? You want me to work for you for free and even take the blame? He asked mockingly. Why sure? How can you say such shameless words? Chapter 802. Isn't business like this? You have needs, and so do I. There's no need to be secretive. Huaisher shrugged. You have to be thick-skinned. No matter how outrageous the sweet talk is, you have to be able to say it. Otherwise, how can you make money? Lin Wei looked at him indifferently without fear. But there are so many gangs in Kyoto. Why should I cooperate with you? Huaisher smiled. Of course, it's because the Yingzhou pedigree can't kill me. As long as the legitimacy of the Donbua inner circle still existed, as long as Huaisher was still wearing the tiger skin of the Astronomy Association, the Yingzhou pedigree could not think of using any illegal means to deal with Huaisher. This was a veritable country within a country, a sanctuary that any outsider dreamed of. If the Yingzhou division wanted to do it, it would be even simpler. Did they really think that Russell and the Ivory Tower were vegetarians? In today's Yingzhou, except for the anesthetic tracking alliance formed by the hybrids, there was no other gang in Kyoto that could resist the pressure of the looming hall. As for the other extreme Daos, they might even sell out the Six Directions Union, let alone cooperate with them. If the Lyoha Society wanted to cooperate, they had no other choice except for Huaisher. Lin Wei was still indifferent. He glanced at Huaisher and sneered. Then why should you cooperate with me? That's even simpler. Huaisher replied with a smile. Because I can kill you. At that moment, a buzzing sound burst out from outside the heavy walls. Hundreds of meters away, the noisy street instantly fell into silence. Everyone looked around in amazement, feeling the spreading chill and the urge to tremble. In the middle of the street, a middle-aged man with a dull expression and an unhealed scar on his face raised his head. He wore a samurai-like robe, and his right hand pressed on the non-existent sword at his waist. His murderous intent was ferocious. The protector of the Alliance, Tion. But then, several ferocious malice erupted from the headquarters of the Lyoha Society like a geyser. as if the door to the abyss had been opened. Under his provocation, the frenzied monsters revealed their existence without any concealment, gnashing their teeth and sucking blood. Surrounded by his subordinates, Lin Wei grinned fearlessly. The thirsty king of monsters asked mockingly, "Him? No, he's not here to kill you." Huai Shi said, "He's in charge of protecting me so that I can leave this place alive, even if he has to sacrifice his own life." At that moment, little Hud in the woods, who had been silent behind Huai Shi, suddenly took a step forward, pulled out the cursed poison blade, and pressed it against Huai Shi's back. From the blade, an evil aura that originated from the Lin family and was no different from Lin Wei's fearless aura was revealed. This was the real killing move. Lin Wei's fearless smile froze. Not only did he not feel happy about the actions of his junior, but he also felt an uncontrollable rage. "Don't be angry, sixth granduncle." Hiding behind his teacher, Lin Shurgio comforted him helplessly. "Didn't you say it already? I'm rebellious." Lin Wei was not afraid. Never in his wildest dreams would he have thought that the most useless little 19 back then would have the ability to draw his blade in front of him. He even prepared a thick black pot to put on his head. "You've really grown up, little 19. Thank you for the compliment, granduncle." Lin Shurgio did not seem to notice the malice on granduncle. He adjusted his collar, intentionally or unintentionally revealing the badge of Dombua's supervisor under his collar. Imagine the gold medal fighter of the Astronomy Association, the future hope of the Ivory Tower, the king of Dombua, at his weakest moment, came to the headquarters of the Six He Society, only to be stabbed in the back, and on the wound was the unique curse of the path of evil. If it wasn't Lin Wei who did it, could it be his student? Could it be that Lin Wei was not afraid to explain himself? Didn't the mouth grow on Huai Shi's body? But it was his moment of carelessness that led the wolf into the house, only to find out that he had been played a badger game. "You think this can make me bow down?" Lin Wei was not afraid of anger and laughed. "Aren't you looking down on me too much, little brat? I'm just demonstrating a certain possibility that I said. Why are you in such a hurry?" Huai Shi shrugged indifferently and waved his hand. Lin Shurju sheathed his sword as if nothing had happened and smiled harmlessly at granduncle's scarlet eyes. "Huai Shi, you expect the Sixty Society to help you through this difficult time, but you're bargaining with me with such an attitude? Aren't you being too arrogant?" Lin Wei was not afraid and slowly withdrew his gaze. "If there are enough benefits and benefits, I might consider it, but I don't like this attitude. It's fine as long as I like it." Huai Shi was still calm. "Isn't this the so-called cooperation? Both sides have to like it and be happy. If one side is not happy, then it can't be forced." He paused and could not help but laugh. "As for the difficulties you mentioned, don't worry. I've never counted on the Sixty Society. Even if I empty your pockets, how much money can you have?" He did not care for that little bit of money. The old man sneered. "Then we'll talk about it after you get through this." "Okay, then we'll talk about it when the time comes." Huai Shi slowly got up and reminded him, "But helping in a time of need and adding flowers to a brocade are two different things. Old sir, when the time comes, the price will not be this." Lin Wei was not afraid of such an attitude and could not help but sneer, thinking that it was the last stubbornness. "We'll talk about it when the time comes. Then goodbye." Huai Shi turned around and led his students away from the Six He Society's encirclement. He smiled and waved goodbye to everyone who had served him. A gloomy subordinate asked softly, "Old dragon, are we just going to let them go like this? What else can we do?" Lin Wei was not afraid and looked at his confidant with a faint smile. "You go and kill him, and I'll announce you as the next leader tomorrow. What do you think?" His confidant lowered his head in silence and did not speak again. On the tea table, there was the sound of something breaking. Countless wriggling blood vessels emerged from the thin celadone teacup, causing the texture and color of flesh and blood to emerge from the verdant teacup. In the end, a deformed eye slowly opened and stared viciously at the world in front of it, then quickly declined along with the fading vitality. Only fragments and dust were left. Lin Wei was not afraid. He took one last look and left with a flick of his sleeves. What a waste of a good pot. Late at night, at the Doomsday Pier, a luxurious liner slowly docked on the shore. The former industries of the Heavenly Move family were still handed over to the Heavenly Move family to continue to operate, including the important financial resources of the former alliance, the business of shipping, smuggling, and deep-sea fishing. For an island country like Ingzhou, it was natural for them to rely on the sea for their livelihood. At this moment, as the liner docked, a petite figure appeared behind the gradually lowered escalator. When she saw Huaishur standing below, she was stunned for a moment, then hurried down and nodded respectfully. "Teacher, I'm back. You've grown taller," Xiao Yuan. Huaishur rubbed her hair. "Thank you for your hard work." "Don't mention it. I'm just running errands." After she finished speaking, she suddenly thought of something and moved aside, revealing the guest behind her who was walking down the escalator. As if she had been exposed to the sun, the middle-aged woman's skin was slightly tanned, her footsteps were light, and her body was well-proportioned like a cheetah's. Her eyes were almost glowing in the dark. She took the initiative to extend her hand. "Mr. Huaishur, my father is tied up with miscellaneous matters and can't travel, so I'm here on behalf of my father. Welcome, Ms. Gwendolyn." Huaishur nodded and held her hand. "I also want to thank the PASS group for lending a helping hand at such a critical time. This is just the next step of our cooperation." Gwendolyn smiled. "When I came, my father told me that you were his friend." As she spoke, the dark tide was lit up by the searchlights in the distance. Amidst the rumbling of the steam whistle, countless huge silhouettes leaped out from the horizon at the end of the sea. The mighty fleet of ships broke through the tide and headed towards Ingzhou. This was just the beginning. What a rundown place. In front of a dark car, a middle-aged man in a suit raised his hand and fanned the air in front of him. It's hard to imagine that there is such a desolate place in the capital now. Is there really any investment value in a place like this? He turned around and looked at the people behind him, triggering a burst of laughter. On the other side of the road, the bulldozers on the construction site were puffing out thick smoke, clearing the debris on the ground with loud noises. In the ruins behind the broken wall, the children playing in the secret base looked up curiously and peered at the solemn fleet of cars before quickly looking away. Only the visitors coldly observed the scene around them, and the receptionist in front of them. He was simply too young. They were too dismissive of them. Was he going to give it up? "I'm the receptionist appointed by Mr. Huaishur this time, Forest Hut." The young man with a gentle and sunny smile bowed and handed over his business card, making people have a good impression. "Thank you for today's evaluation. I'm Kataoka Shin, the Vice President of the Risk Management Department of Changtong Bank. Please advise me." The middle-aged man leading the team did not underestimate the young man in front of him. He also handed over his business card with both hands solemnly and revealed a business smile. "Please rest assured that we will definitely give an objective and fair result." Forest Hut nodded. "Then, all the information is ready. Please follow me." However, Kataoka did not take a step forward, and none of the evaluators behind him followed him. He just stood there. He looked around coldly. When Forest Hut turned around curiously, he saw Kataoka's smile. The polite smile could not hide the hidden coldness below. "There's no need to look at the information. We've seen enough these days," he said. "This time, the main purpose of coming here is to break away from the data on paper and personally go to the field to investigate. I don't think Mr. Lin Zhong will mind, right?" He did not hide his purpose for coming, nor did he intend to follow the previous rules. At this point, if Domwa's people still expected others to follow their pace, wouldn't they be too naive? The surprise that he had expected came. The young man was stunned for a moment, and then his expression became serious, as if he had finally realized that something was wrong. "Lin," he corrected. "This was the most important thing." Chapter 803. There was a sudden silence. Kataoka was stunned. He didn't know what he was talking about. "My surname is Lin, and my name is Zhonghua." "Thank you." Forest Hut pointed at the business card he handed over and began to admire the Ingzhou people's ability to pretend. "And it's not a pronunciation, it's a pronunciation. I'm not from Ingzhou. Sorry, I didn't notice." "It's okay." Lin Shurgio waved his hand casually. To put it simply, you don't want to sit in the office, but want to walk around, right? Do you need me to arrange a car? No need. I came from a business background. Kataoka patted his thigh and looked proud. Just relying on this pair of legs is enough. He wasn't interested in sitting in a car to see the model projects that had been built. Instead, he was more interested in seeing the darkness hidden under the sun in the inner circle of Donbua, those decadent and abandoned places. Otherwise, how could he deduct a few valuations? It seems that everyone came prepared. Forrest Hutt raised his eyebrows, but he didn't panic. Instead, he smiled. Then, is there anything you want to see? How about we take a look at Vermilion Burr Village first? It's right next to it. Kataoka picked up the map in his hand and suggested, I saw that your construction plan didn't mention the project there. Recently, large-scale construction has begun again. Fortunately, it's just a large competition venue and a few training bases. Lin Shurja walked in front and led the way. After 2 turns, they appeared in front of the construction site. The sign of the construction of Huai paper was still hanging at the top. In the midst of the clamor, the foundation had not been dug yet, and several construction vehicles were constantly entering and leaving with black smoke. In order to enrich the spiritual activities of the people of Donbua, improve everyone's cultural literacy, and cultivate their hobbies, the person in charge, Mr. Huaishur, has decided to start construction in advance. The foundation will be ready in a few days. It is expected that this place will be filled with a concert hall, a dedicated competition venue, and facilities that can accommodate hundreds of students at the same time for training and accommodation. Lin Shurjo stood in front of the construction renderings and showed the future to the evaluation team, introducing it endlessly. However, the expressions of the visitors were still cold and indifferent. They couldn't help but want to laugh. This kind of trick was too common. In order to get out of the predicament and improve the confidence of investors, they did not hesitate to drink poison to quench their thirst, draw bigger pies, and dream bigger. However, this would only make them even more short of money. It would not help the current situation at all. After cheating the investors, who would care about the follow-up construction? It could even be said that it was destined to end badly from the start. Kataoka looked around. At the same time, he felt disdain in his heart, but at the same time, he nodded in admiration. In that case, it would probably cost a lot of money, right? Lin Shurjo nodded. It's all right. It'll only cost about 10 million USD or so. It's just that the maintenance fees are a little troublesome. Who are you trying to fool? Kataoka sneered in his heart. It was already good enough that 20 million US dollars was enough to get a professional concert hall. Did he really think that professional sound facilities were the same as those on the streets? The rest of the project could not be completed. 10 million? Let's talk about it after the initial phase of the project is completed. If that's the case, why wasn't the project written in the loan proposal? Kataoka asked. This part doesn't need a loan. The project funds have all been paid. Lin Shurju looked at them in confusion. This was donated by the sponsors, including the project funds, professional equipment, and personnel. We only provided the venue and follow-up maintenance. So 10 million is actually more than enough. We can even save a lot. The evaluation team was silent for a long time. They looked at each other in shock. For the first time, they felt that they did not understand Ingzhou language. What did he mean? There was a fool who came to Ingzhou and did not do so many investment projects. Instead, he came to Donbua to build an art center for free? What kind of dream was this? Well, isn't it written clearly here? Lin Shurju reached out and pointed at the announcement unit below the renderings. Hell Music Association, Cooking Demon Competition Organizing Committee, and Muse Club announce. In the instant of dead silence, Kataoka's eyes could not help but twitch. Then he felt the phone in his trouser pocket vibrate, and the phone beep behind him kept ringing. The notification of tomorrow's news popped up. Big news in Ingzhou. As a member of the investment industry and the risk control department, his need for information and financial news was far greater than that of other industries. Almost everyone's phone would not be turned off 24 hours a day, and there were even 3 or 4 phones that were ready to receive news at any time. When he took out his phone, he saw the title on the pop-up window. Who will be the host of the next Asian cooking demon competition? Enter Doomsday, the future city of art. Is this an official announcement? Forrest Hutt came over, and his smiling face was indescribably annoying. I wanted to ask everyone to keep it a secret, but it should be fine now. Mr. Kataoka, you seem to be feeling unwell. Are you feeling unwell? Kataoka's expression twitched. No, I'm not. Then what do you think of this news? The young man blinked his big, curious eyes and looked at him. It seems like the situation is very serious. No, it's a good thing. Kataoka replied stiffly. It's all good news. That's good. It's really reassuring when a professional speaks. Lin Sergio breathed a sigh of relief and continued to lead the way. Since we're already at Suzakacho, why don't we take a look at Taifucho in Dombwa Subdistrict? In the future plan, this area will be a commercial area, and there are already many projects under construction. The people of the evaluation team followed behind without saying a word. Kataoka glanced back and saw that someone had already called the higher-ups for instructions. Although it was an unexpected major benefit, it still had nothing to do with the financial situation of Dombwa itself. Tourism may be able to drive a lot of industries, but compared to the large area, it was a drop in the bucket and insignificant. It was just on the surface. Just look at the construction sites that were still being built rapidly on both sides. If they couldn't find a large amount of income, then the financial situation would only get tighter and tighter. He stopped in his tracks and looked up at the huge building that had been preliminarily outlined by the sea breeze in the distance. Is this the planned aquarium? Yes. Lin Sergio nodded and looked at the outline of the building that was gradually being completed. How is it? It's very impressive, isn't it? To be honest, I've never been to an aquarium in my life. After the opening, please take care of me. With all due respect, Lin. Mr. Lin. Kataoka pushed his glasses and said seriously, for today's Dombwa, facilities such as the aquarium itself are not necessary, and it also requires long-term financial subsidies and expenditures for maintenance. I'm afraid it will be difficult for our bank to pass such funds. And the building next to it is not in the loan plan, right? Additional construction? That building, that is the new headquarters of Dombwa Shipping. They are fully responsible for the construction of the building. Dombwa Shipping. Yes, it should be the news in the past 2 days. Miss Rika of the Simu family conformed to the changes. The members voted and passed the decision to reorganize the Simu Ocean Fishing Group and officially change its name. The headquarters will also be relocated nearby. The aquarium next to it is sponsored and maintained by them. By the way, there is additional funding and support from the Pacific Rim Rare Animal Protection Association. They will also sponsor a considerable number of precious marine species. Lin Sergio calmly replied. As for the loan, you don't have to worry about it. You should actually look at the current information. The aquarium has abundant funds and is no longer in the loan plan. Kataoka froze in place. Lin Sergio paused for a moment and looked at him deeply. With a faint smile, he told him, Dombwa Shipping and the Pacific Rim Wildlife Protection Association have signed a new liner route agreement. The two sides will further cooperate around the common vision of protecting more endangered marine species. This is also written in the information. It's a pity that you didn't read it. Kataoka frowned subconsciously. He noticed that something was wrong. The reorganization of the Simu Ocean Fishing Group was a small matter. What he cared about was another organization mentioned by the cabin in the woods. Wait a minute. He remembered that the Pacific Rim Rare Animal Protection Association was an environmental protection organization with a long name. It was composed of two organizations with the same long name, the Southeast Asian Marine Conservation Association and the Global Whale Protection Association. The operating group behind it should be. His brain buzzed, and he didn't react. However, they did not have much time to react before continuous notifications rang out from the evaluator team's phones again. There was new good news. Dombwa Shipping has officially joined the Glorious Shipping Alliance. Glorious Shipping Alliance, a shipping alliance led by the Egyptian royal family's Northern Shipping, the Russian Federation's Emperor Shipping, and Dongsha's Distant Shipping. After monopolizing the Indian Ocean, It is a behemoth that occupies more than 60% of the logistics channels in the Western Pacific Ocean. The formed Logistics Alliance shares all port berths, containers, and even logistics information internally. It is an out-and-out monopoly-level giant. With Xinjiang Shipping and the Convergence Alliance, it occupies more than 90% of the shipping channels in the world and monopolizes all border sea transportation. Even if a sampan entered their register, they would be able to fish for endless amounts of gold on the sea without any hindrance. But the problem was, with Doomsday Shipping's tiny size, how could they possibly join in? Mr. Kataoka, the subordinate, came forward and said in a low voice, "Internal news just arrived. Taichung Heavy Industry has accepted an order for 16 supergiant freighters from Doomsday Shipping." Impossible. Kataoka lost his voice. Where do they get the money? How can they get so much business? This is too hurtful, Mr. Kataoka. Next to him, Lin Shurjia was stunned and shrugged helplessly. "We borrowed a special interest-free loan from the Dongxiao Border Bank, and the speed of approval was quite fast. After all, there are also shares of Taichung Heavy Industry in it, and even the assessment was saved. It's all because of the teacher's own face." He smiled and explained, "After all, he has more friends." In the silence, only the sound of the mobile phone vibrating again sounded. This time, it was the Asian headline of the financial section of tomorrow's news. At the press conference of Australia's Grassy Mining Group, the mayor of Canberra, Australian mining giant Sand King, Reed Turner personally announced frowny face Grassy Mining Group and Doomsday Group have reached strategic cooperation. Within the next 7 years, Doomsday Shipping would undertake all transport orders of Grassy Mining in the Yingzhou region. As a resource-poor island country, Yingzhou's mining industry was basically dependent on Australia's imports. Starting next year, all the transport of iron, ore, aluminum, and bituminous coal to Yingzhou would be completely monopolized by Doomsday Shipping. Not only that, Doomsday Group had already obtained the authorization of the Ivory Tower and obtained the right to use an agency of all its smelting patents. They would also join forces with Regi's Kansan Iron and Steel to build a brand new giant smelting base in Anfang. Together with Grassy Mining, they would explore the field of pollution-free smelting technology. The amount of information in a short piece of news was frighteningly huge. Ivory Tower, Australian Mining, and Glory Shipping had silently completed the convergence in just a few days, in the hands of one person. With him as the leader, a brand new industrial chain was formed that carried out all the steps of mining, transportation, production, and processing. Not only that, the monster that had yet to break out of its shell had already reached out to the market of Yingzhou's heavy industry. Everyone seemed to have seen a brand new behemoth rising from this narrow area. The situation was completely reversed at this moment. But when the weight fell from the sky and pressed on the other end of the scale, what was emitted was the crisp sound of the mobile phone vibrating. It made people's vision go dark, and they almost couldn't stand still. It seems that I don't have to tell you about the purchase orders from the Abyss Development Agency and the archaeological team. Lin 19 smiled and looked at the dull faces. He felt a burst of pure and strong resentment gathering and couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Phew, comfortable. Chapter 804. At the signing ceremony, the lights shone brightly. Huaishur took the pen from Yuan Yuan and signed his name on the contract with the Doomsday Group's official seal under the frenzied cameras of the reporters. The three-party exchange contract was made in 5 copies, which were kept by the Doomsday Group, the Australian Grassland Mining Company, the Kansan Group, as well as the Ivory Tower and the Legacy Court. It was a preliminary agreement of strategic cooperation between the parties. He finally breathed a sigh of relief. The dust had settled. He extended his hand to the smiling woman beside him. "Miss Gwendolyn, thank you for your support, Sand King. I hope our friendship can last forever. We're just helping each other for what we need. The Grassland Mining Company is honored to have an ally like you." Gwendolyn squeezed his hand tightly, and the two of them showed their intimate cooperation under the spotlight of the reporters. However, after letting go and returning backstage, Gwendolyn seemed to be a little hesitant, as if she wanted to say something but stopped herself. "What's wrong?" Huaishur asked curiously. "Do you have any questions about the terms of the contract, or did we not treat you well enough?" "No, it's just a personal request." Gwendolyn thought for a moment and looked at the man who was much younger than her. She asked embarrassedly, "Excuse me, can you say that sentence to me again?" Huaishur was confused. "What sentence?" He felt Yuan's subtle gaze behind him and could not help but feel a little nervous. Gwendolyn's expression suddenly became a little excited, and she reminded him in a low voice, "The sentence you said to the inner circle of the Dombo group, the sentence." As she spoke, she made a pose in an attempt to awaken Huaishur's memory. Huaishur was stunned for a long time and scratched his head in confusion. "You mean," he asked tentatively, "we both have a bright future?" Yes, that's it. That's it." Gwendolyn excitedly clenched her fist and shook his hand vigorously, her eyes sparkling. "That's why I'm here this time. Thank you. By the way, can you sign for me again later? I bought your full set of limited edition cards." Yes. Huaishur's eyes twitched. "No problem. The needs of the partners should be satisfied as much as possible, and the conditions that could not be met should also be met." Soon, Gwendolyn was dragged away by her assistant. There were still many things that she needed to arrange. Before she left, she still insisted on reminding Huaishur not to forget her signature. After watching her leave, Huaishur felt cold sweat dripping from his forehead. The pressure was immense. Does this count as a failure of my transformation? How could he still rely on his fans for a living? Of course, the success of this cooperation might not have been due to the addition of the idol halo. Lady Gwendolyn had been married for many years and even had 2 children. She was a rare career woman who cared about her family. As the executive officer of the Grassy Mining Company, no matter how busy she was, she had to call her husband and children to tell them goodnight stories every night. She might lose her composure because of her good-looking face. In the end, the cooperation between the Grassy Group and Dombo Group was built on the basis of mutual benefits. The Grassy Group, which was about to reach saturation, needed the Ivory Tower's channels to expand its sales and influence in the Border and Inferno. Sand King was more interested in the other thing that Huaishur had promised him. The key that no one took seriously in the news was the field of pollution-free smelting technology. It was true that Australia was a desert, but the area around Canberra had been restored to green and vitality. The heavy industry of the past could not casually pollute and destroy the environment. Therefore, most of the production bases were migrating to the desert areas in the interior of Australia. But if this continued, it would only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. It would also cause problems for the expansion of the Greenland. This old man, who was gradually becoming known as the Lord of Fertile Earth, would never allow his long-cherished wish to be destroyed because of this. What they needed at this time was technical support from the Ivory Tower. Huaishur also had the unique craftsmanship in the entire territory. Behind the terrifying technology that could completely mechanize the entire Inferno was countless unique craftsmanship that was different from today's technology. According to the calculations of the scholars at the Ivory Tower Research Institute, after the Ivory Tower's technical ability combined with the craftsmanship of the craftsmanship, within about 3 years, the pollution caused by conventional heavy industry and metal smelting could be reduced by 30%. If there was a breakthrough in the technology, the final reduction would stabilize at about 43%. If the cost-performance ratio was not considered, there would be no problem in achieving a completely pollution-free state. On the day of the signing ceremony, the new Smelting Technology Center would be built in Donbwa. The construction team of the Ivory Tower would be responsible for it and would be able to start work within a week. But this had nothing to do with Huaishur. It could be said that other than occasionally needing his signature, everything else had nothing to do with him. There would be more professional people in charge, so Huaishur did not need to worry about it. He sat in the car, closed his eyes, and could not help but let out a long breath. He felt a deep sense of exhaustion. In just 2 or 3 days, he felt that he had used up half of his brain in order to settle this matter. If the situation had not forced him, he would not have brought forward the mid to late stage of his original plan to this point. Behind the seemingly awe-inspiring results were Huaishi's careful operation, as if she was treading on thin ice. To put it bluntly, there was nothing strange about it. He was just relying on his face to freeload all the way, gaining something without risking anything. First, he relied on his friendship to open up a path to Sand King. With the guarantee of the Ivory Tower's background, the two sides were able to negotiate on equal terms. After ensuring that Doomsday Sea Transport could handle the logistics of the transportation, he turned around and looked for Hu Po's stinky sister. He joined forces with the Guanshan group, which was now so rich that it needed to be digested, and took the large order for the concentrate smelting. This was the first step. Next, he went to Taiching Heavy Industries, cut the queue, and placed an order for 18 giant cargo ships. Then, relying on the transportation order and Yi Shuiya's relationship, he got an interest-free loan from the Dongxia Border Bank for free. He even pulled in his cousin Chu Hongchen as a shareholder to share the risk. Then, through the Dongxia genealogy, as well as his identity in the Southeast Asian Ocean Protection Association, he contacted the Northern Shipping Company. He relied on the 18 giant cargo ships and the order in his hands to obtain the qualifications to join. In the end, with the patent of the Ivory Tower in hand, he returned the favor and turned around to have a second discussion with the Grassy Mining Company. He completed a deep strategic cooperation and completely opened up the entire chain. He completed the realization of his connections and foundation. Everyone had money to earn, and every participant had meat to eat. He was even about to form a new industry monopoly. He only lacked money. But would the problem now still be money? The current Doomsday inner circle was not short of money at all. As long as Huaishi nodded, money would be sent to him endlessly. From the originally bright future to the rise of an industry giant, this was no longer a matter of steady profit and no loss. Instead, it was a loss if one joined the partnership late. 1 second late, 1 second late, 1 day late, 1 day late. If they could not get on board, the investors with a lot of money in their hands would probably not be able to swallow this regret for the rest of their lives. Even if he did not go to Mount Guan and the Grassy Mining Company to borrow money, Huaishi was not weak at all. As long as he took this report card to Russell, kicked open the office door, slammed the contract on the table, and told him, "Old bastard, hurry up and give me the money. Do you think the old man will give me less money?" Russell was laughing so hard that his legs were not closed yet. He was going crazy with joy. Just Huaishi's performance that exceeded everyone's expectations had been unanimously recognized and approved by all the members of the Academic Affairs Office. He did not rely on murder and arson, but relied on his own ability to prove Russell's vision and prove his value. If it were anyone else, could they do 1/10 of what he did now? He revived the Doomsday inner circle out of thin air and introduced strong reinforcements, such as Taiching Heavy Industry, Australia's Grassy Mining Company, and Glory Shipping. Not only did he not lose any initiative, but he also consolidated his indispensable position in the alliance. He had also fulfilled the wish of many people in the Ivory Tower over the past 50 years. The first step of returning to the present realm was a solid one. It was like using an iron head to smash the nail of the Ivory Tower into the floor of the present realm with his bare hands. He couldn't pull out. The future grand plan was settled in the frame of the Doomsday inner circle. Now, the foundation had been laid. As long as the money was in place, the Doomsday inner circle would immediately become a treasure bowl famous for cutting-edge technology development and tourism. Therefore, it was time to withdraw the money. Huaishi looked up and heard the sound of the car door being opened. The midgets of the Magic Gold Bank stood respectfully outside the car, smiling with surprise and enthusiasm. They rushed up like a swarm of bees, grabbed his small hand, and did not let go. They surrounded him and bombarded him with stereo sound. "Mr. Huaishi, please come in. Everyone is here. You're the only one left to sign." "There's no hurry. There's no hurry." Huaishi stood firmly in front of the red carpet, reached out, adjusted his collar, and replied with a smile, "It's just as you said." He paused for a moment and said seriously, We also feel that it's necessary to reiterate the development prospects of the Doomsday district. In a short silence, all the faces stiffened. Then, they showed 10 times more enthusiasm and agreement than before. The applause was like thunder. By the time the person in charge of Chungtong Bank arrived, the meeting was already over. The dust had settled. What the hell is going on? The middle-aged man who barged into the meeting room was furious. Excluding us from a meeting, you conducted a discussion. This kind of thing is simply unheard of. We're going to report your illegal operation to the present Union Alliance. We, Chungtong Bank, will never allow or approve of this kind of thing. He was simply unable to restrain his anger. Whether it was a pretense or purely out of anger, it had to be like this. Otherwise, how could they seize this loophole and gain more initiative in the future? But unexpectedly, in the joyous atmosphere, those smiles were still there, as if they had no intention of appeasing or backing down. They just held their teacups and smiled. Mr. Yamanaka, you came at the right time. This meeting passed 2 issues, just in time to inform you. Huaisher spun a pen in his hand and looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. Between his 5 fingers, the pen spun nimbly, as if it would stab into his throat at any time, making the corners of his eyes twitch wildly. He stiffened in place and felt a wave of uneasiness. The first thing, due to the increase in the project, the loan required by the Doomsday district this time seems to be about twice as much as the original. This. Yamanaka's expression twitched, and he decided to take the initiative to take a step back. After evaluation, it's indeed a matter of course. It's not impossible to discuss. There's no need to discuss. Huaisher said calmly, this is the second thing. He spread his hands regretfully and announced, due to the increase in the loan volume and the change in demand, the composition of the syndicate can no longer meet the needs of the Doomsday Inner Circle. Therefore, in order to understand the difficulties of your bank and avoid a break in the capital chain, I suggest that the syndicate structure be restructured and optimized. Doomsday District will no longer apply for loans from Chungtong, so you don't have to worry about any risks in the future. As for the vacant position, how about the Dongxiao Border Bank fill-in? As he spoke, he looked around and spread his hands. I've finished speaking. Next, we can start voting. The dwarf of the Magic Gold Bank smiled and raised his hand. Seconded. The person in charge of the Archean Fund shrugged and also raised his hand. Seconded. Next was the American Free Bank and the Russian Federation's Snow Mountain Commercial Bank. In the end, when Huaisher raised her hand, the final decision was made. Yamanaka's vision turned black, and he fell to the ground. He could no longer hear what was said after that. His heart was cold. Please listen to our explanation, Mr. Huaisher. When the meeting ended, the special agent of the Chungtong Bank, who had rushed over after receiving the news, finally found Huaisher in the parking lot. He looked embarrassed, uneasy, and full of guilt. This is all because of the reckless actions of the people below. It's this bastard who listened to other people's instigation and wanted to make things difficult for you. Without waiting for Huaisher to speak, the man who had been pushed out to take the blame leaned over in a sorry state. It was a standard seat. The slightly old servant promised in a sorrowful voice, almost in tears, "We have always treated you as a precious friend. Please don't be so heartless. Give us another chance. We will definitely give you an explanation." Huaisher was at a loss. He could hardly tell whether the 2 faces were sincere or acting. It was also difficult to understand the brain circuits of the Yingzhou people. There's no need to be like this, both of you. He sighed and comforted them softly. I know that you have your difficulties. How can I not understand? I have always been full of trust and understanding for your bank. It's impossible for me to hold a grudge because of small matter. The special agent was stunned and immediately pleasantly surprised. But then, he saw Huaisher's regretful expression. Unfortunately, I have never had many friends, and you are not included in them. He raised his head with a faint smile and glanced at the gloomy old man behind the window of the car in the distance. He could not help but shrug helplessly. And who are you? In the silence, no one responded. Huaisher waved his hand, said goodbye to his neighbor with a smile, and turned to walk away. Stepping on his road, He returned to the place that only belonged to him. This was the first step. Chapter 805. A week later, in the Domwood district, outside the observation room of the newly built technical laboratory at the edge of the mountains, scholars and alchemists from all over the world sat in front of the screen, staring at the scene in the observation room with wide eyes. Professor Anton, who was specially sent as a technical guide, picked up the walkie-talkie in his hand. "You can start now, Mr. Huaishur." In the empty space of the observation room, Huaishur raised his hand and temporarily took off the surveillance of the Continuation Institute. The flesh on his right arm quickly showed the texture of steel, and the complicated mechanism unfolded, revealing the lingering blood-red flames. "Forging furnace, start." Right in his hand, crimson streaks quickly popped up on the heavy iron ore. Under his surveillance, the temperature in the observation room soared rapidly. It was as if there was an invisible fire burning fiercely in it. As his 5 fingers covered it, the fist-sized iron ore let out a fine, cracking sound. The burning red color instantly faded, and the intact surface of the ore was already full of cracks. Huaishur retracted his hand and buckled the monitoring bracelet again. The forging was over. To be precise, the extraction part of the demonstration was over. When he picked up the hammer next to him and knocked on the ore full of cracks, countless stone powder rustled down, and particles with impurities scattered all over the ground. And on the original table, the iron ore had become an iron bar as thick as a finger with a beautiful snowflake texture. "Thank you for your hard work, Mr. Huaishur." The experiment staff hurried to greet him and handed him water and a handkerchief. Huaishur's head was already sweating. After waving his hand to indicate that he did not need to rest, he turned around and went outside the monitoring room to join the discussion. This was the demonstration and teaching of the forger's skills. Under dozens of observation and recording devices, all secrets were revealed and displayed in front of everyone for discussion and summary. It is indeed a smelting method that is completely different from the thinking of the contemporaneous realm. Anton studied the information on the screen and pondered for a moment. It does feel a little like alchemy, but it is not sublimation through the matrix, but reconstruction from the old foundation. Is this the origin of the name Forger? Beside him, Alchemist nodded. There's a feeling of physical attraction. This was just a demonstration of the basic skills, and it was nothing special. The same effect could be achieved with alchemy, but there was a subtle difference between the two. Those who came here were all experts and elites. Naturally, they could feel the difference. Alchemy focused on the transformation and sublimation of miracles, extracting gold from ordinary objects and turning something rotten into something magical. On the other hand, the craftsmen's skills were closer to the thinking of scholars. They paid more attention to strengthening the essence of the forged object. Instead of turning the iron into a more outstanding material, it was better to make the iron more solid and of better quality, which was the most ideal state in theory. It was not smelting at high temperatures, but extraction and gathering. The high temperature was just a supplementary effect to make the changes more visible and faster. The true key was that Huaishur had temporarily given the item a strand of origin substance through the forging furnace. It was as if it had been given a one-sided and fake soul. After giving the order, the iron contained within naturally gathered towards the inner layer, forming the final iron ingot. Unlike alchemy, it did not change the essence of the object, but unlike scholars, it did not rely on laws. It had some of the advantages between the two, and, at the same time, slightly made up for the shortcomings between the two. In terms of application, there may be advantages and disadvantages according to the actual situation, but it was still a technology that did not have the cost-performance ratio for the current situation. The technology that once recreated the Twilight Village had developed to its peak, but it was not necessary for the current situation. Having the characteristics of scholars and alchemists meant that they had to meet the harsh requirements for both aptitudes. Huaishur could take a detour with the hand of confinement, but the others could forget about it. The existence of the forging furnace alone had cut off the path for alchemists to carry forward. The forging furnace could only be built by the previous generation of alchemists for their students, and now the only living alchemist in the world was Huai. He was still paralyzed. Now, he was gasping for breath when refining iron. Moreover, not everyone was as adaptable as him and the alchemists. The more technology there was, the better. The best technology was often the most suitable for oneself. What Huai needed to do was not to spread her influence and recruit more disciples. Instead, she needed to provide as much data and practical cases as possible through the innate talents and advantages of blacksmithing. This would allow the research center to analyze and shorten the preliminary research process. As for how to deconstruct, imitate, and absorb the advantages of the alchemist technology, and how much could be done, it was the job of these experts. Are you feeling well? During the lunch break, Professor Anton sat opposite Huai with a plate in his hand. He glanced at the still red bracelet in his hand and said, "There's no need to force yourself. This is not something that can be achieved overnight. You should rest in peace now. Staying at home will make me look hairy." Huai shook his head. "I have to come out and show my presence." As long as you have a sense of propriety. Professor Anton did not try to persuade him. It was not that he was indifferent or anything, but he trusted Huai's judgment more. So, he changed the topic and talked about the school. But at the end of the meal, he could not help but ask about Huai's condition. "Actually, it's almost healed, but the tenants can't be chased away, and they don't pay the rent. It's always a waste of energy." Huai raised his right hand and moved his 5 fingers, revealing a trace of metallic luster. It was a state he deliberately maintained. Thanks to the triumphant progress a while ago, the inner circle of Danwave was changing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Everyone could feel the light of the future approaching bit by bit. Great Si Ming's divinity was also recovering rapidly, like adding oil to the fire. The original 2+ years was shortened by more than a month out of thin air. This was not the final result, but it was still in the stage of slowly accelerating. It could be predicted that in the future, the speed of shortening would be faster and faster. Now, he could be said to have escaped the most dangerous stage, and the situation would only become clearer. Now, his body had completely recovered, and his soul was free from the erosion of the abyssal sediment. He did not have to worry about the risk of solidifying at any time, but his injuries were difficult to heal. His soul had merged with the forging furnace, and the sacred mark had merged with the two at the same time. There was no distinction between the three. Now, he was a genuine furnace of negative energy. But the problem was that there was always a piece of annoying firewood in the furnace that could not be burned out. Not only that, it kept trying to erode him, assimilate him, and turn the furnace back into flesh. The funny thing was Huai had been trying to restore the steel arm to its original state, but now it was the other way around. He had to work hard to prevent the forging furnace from being turned into flesh. After all, it was a destructive element, and even the cell tissue of a derivative had such a powerful threat. Thinking of this, he was suddenly a little worried about the bald man who had disappeared. He was not worried about whether his hair would fall off, but whether his condition would be a problem. This was what Huai had been hiding from everyone. Yu Dongri should know that even if he changed his body and split his soul, he did not get rid of the erosion of the abyssal. He just sealed the mutated part of his soul. The transformation process was interrupted. The progress bar was stuck. He was still stepping on the wire rope of the abyssal abyss. But it was useless to worry. With Liu Ri's family background, he could naturally keep him safe. Huai did not need to worry about him. After cooperating with the research center to complete the basic data collection, Huai had nothing to do after setting the time for the next demonstration. There were still a few hours before dinner, but there was nothing else to do. He found that he had nothing to do. He might as well take a leisurely stroll, go shopping. With a bodyguard, wearing a flowery shirt and big pants, Raymond wore a big pair of sunglasses and a swordsman's straw hat. He held a crepe in one hand and an ice cream in the other. His backpack was stuffed with a bunch of specialties and car models, and under his arm was a complete set of spray equipment. Oh, The capital is really not bad. He finished it in a few bites and scratched the leg hair on his legs like a gorilla that had not fully evolved. Boss, pancake fruit, give me another set of crepe. Fleischer was dumbfounded. What are you doing here? Traveling. Raymond answered in a booming voice. Fleischer was speechless. After this guy had fun, he did not even drive his car. Every day, he would wander from morning to night. The only reason he would come back at night was because Feng Shu was paying for his meals. Unless Fleischer went out, he would never be found. He was having so much fun in the present realm that he even forgot about the oath of the tomb of the unreturnable. Anyway, he was now on a mission. Forget about home? Absolutely not. It was just a mission from the ivory tower. In addition to being a driver, this guy's most important task was to be a bodyguard. During Fleischer's period of weakness, he protected Fleischer from accidental assassinations and attacks. In the end, Fleischer's period of weakness was almost over, and everything was calm and peaceful. Nothing happened at all. He was even happier to touch him. Seeing his unguarded look, Fleischer could not help but sigh. Are you protecting me, or am I protecting you? It's all the same, it's all the same. Raymond grinned and was about to say something, but the smile froze on his face. His fingers subconsciously contracted, and he crushed the crepe into mud. The sauce splashed. Fleischer frowned, not knowing what he was doing, but Raymond's expression became serious. It's time to go home, boss, he said. Otherwise, we won't be able to make it in time for the 6 o'clock cartoon. At the end of the long street, the harsh sound of tires rubbing against the road rang out. The giant truck openly broke into the downtown area and started on its own. Then, the spray-painted logo of Fleischer trembled, and the heavy cannon behind the cargo compartment began to warm up. And just inside the core, the radar alarm was shrill. The highly dangerous target was rapidly approaching. Through the radar signal, Raymond only felt a bone-piercing chill completely engulfing him. This kind of alarm was too outrageous, and the danger estimate had already broken the meter at the moment of detection. It was just like saying something. Who did Fleischer, this bastard, offend? Grade 5? But how could a grade 5 openly kill him in the downtown area of the present realm? Just feeling the rapid approach of the signal, the gastrocnemius muscles on his calf began to twitch and tremble, and it was almost difficult for him to breathe. He wanted to turn around, but the terrifying chill froze his movements in place. An invisible aura fell from the sky and suppressed Gordium's body from a distance. The nothingness of the killing intent actually brought substantial pain. Then, a thick palm pressed on Raymond's shoulder. Brat, a face covered with muscles poked out from his side, turned around, looked at him, and wondered, I just went out for a trip. Why do you want to hit me with a cannon? In the brief silence, Fleischer froze in place, looking at the smug old face, and finally couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Don't bully the younger generation for no reason. Okay, Teacher Luo. Of course, it's because it's fun. The head instructor of the Orchard Gym's 400,000 bodybuilding muscles, Fleischer's cheap teacher, and the father of his senior sister, Coach Luo grinned, revealing a sinister smile that wasn't kind at all. Long time no see. Chapter 806. 3 hours later, the dinner was over. It's so healthy. It's rare to have such a good meal. After finishing the steak and salad, Elder Luo put down his knife and fork and habitually took out his protein powder thermos. He saw a cup of freshly squeezed juice beside his hand. It was as if his weight and energy consumption had been accurately calculated. The ratio of calories, sugar, fiber, and even pulp was perfect. As for the taste, it completely took care of his tough guy taste. There was nothing added. He raised his eyebrows, picked up the cup, and drank it in one gulp. He exhaled happily. It's so exquisite, Mr. Fong. I can't help but want to do a few sets of anaerobic exercise to relax. Then I'll prepare supper later. There's a special area in the basement. Please feel free to use it. Feng Shu smiled and changed the plate. After serving the tea, he turned and walked into the kitchen. I miscalculated. The old man lowered his head and rubbed his belly. He felt that his intake today had unknowingly exceeded the limit. It was really terrifying. When he looked at the students in front of him and his students, he couldn't help but shake his head. With such a person around, it's no wonder you two are fed like pigs. He wiped his mouth and put down the tissue in his hand. He finally looked up at Huai Shi and Yuan beside him. This little girl is your student? He glanced at Yuan's hands and bones and nodded casually. She's not bad, but her level is still not good enough. As for Forrest Hutt, he didn't even look at him. Forrest Hutt didn't dare to be angry. He just instinctively shrank behind Huai Shi. You can't see me, you can't see me, you can't see me. It wasn't until now that he realized that this old man was the monster in the orchard gym. In the legends, he was the ruthless man who killed his master and destroyed his ancestors with a single punch when he was extremely angry. The 12th uncle of the little house in the woods was killed by this old man when he was causing trouble in India. He casually squeezed. It was like squeezing a chicken to death. Why did he come to the capital? Little 19 trembled. His ostrich-like attitude made Elder Luo's expression more and more unhappy. No, why sure? He frowned and said, if this was in the past, you would have been kicked out of the sect. Times have changed. Everyone has their own ambitions. Why force yourself? Huai picked up the spoon and stirred the coffee in the cup, blocking the view of the small house in the forest. Mr. Luo, since you've come to the inner circle of Danbo, I've brought my students to entertain you with great hospitality. I've invited you to a meal and arrange accommodation for you, hoping that you'll feel at home. I can understand that old people have bad tempers, but there's no need to do this, right? He raised his head and asked seriously, did I do something wrong? Not at all. As a student, you've done quite well. Not bad. Why sure. I fully feel your respect and politeness. Elder Luo paused for a moment and spread out his hands with an innocent look on his face. So, as a teacher, I have to do my part, right? If I can't see the shortcomings but don't say it out and only care about my face, what kind of teacher am I? Huai Shi sighed and raised his head to drink the coffee in the cup in one gulp. He put down the cup and slowly stood up. Since you're so interested, why don't you give me some advice? He moved his neck and fingers, making a crisp sound of joints rubbing against each other. He stared at the old man behind the table, wanting to beat up the old man who took advantage of his seniority. Elder Luo raised his eyebrows slightly. Your body, is it okay? I can move for the time being. You don't have to worry about it. Huai Shi asked with concern, but what about you? You're so old. It's not good to sprain your waist, right? Protein hurts the kidneys. Is it convenient for you to go to the toilet every night? An empty nest old man with no one to take care of you must be having a hard time, right? Do you want me to hire a nurse for you? Dead silence, a long, dead silence. Lin Sergio swallowed his saliva subconsciously, and his hair stood on end. He felt as if a volcano had risen in front of him, brewing boiling heat flowing under the earth, and was about to erupt with destruction. A shadow of horror covered his face, making his soul and the stigmata tremble. When he reacted, he, Yuan, and even Raymond, who was watching the show, had already shrunk to the corner, staring at the two figures facing each other across the long table. They felt a substantial, no, a murderous intent in the air. Very good, Huai Shi. You're very energetic. Elder Luo slowly grinned, and countless muscles squeezed each other, forming a loving smile. In order to repay your love for me, I'm going to beat you until you can't move today. He said, it's time to make up for the lesson. Come on, Baldy. Huai Shi sneered. I've even fought against the elements of destruction. I'm not afraid of you. Both of them pressed their hands on the table, and their eyes stared at the opponent in front of them. In the silence, suddenly two sounds broke out like the tide. Then, the same terrifying temperature emerged from the two's bodies, followed by completely different colors. One was livid, and the other was burning red. Their hearts beat like a drum, turning their blood into a tide, and urging every inch of power in their limbs and bones in the most violent way. Overload. Both of them grinned at the same time, and their bodies suddenly shook, and then stopped abruptly. A sharp gaze was cast from the kitchen. Young Master and Mr. Luo. The old man in a yellow electric mouse apron stuck his head out. Please go to the basement to fight. In the awkward silence, Huaishi's face twitched, and he nodded obediently. Okay. There was a special training space in the spacious basement. Lin Shizhou sat on a chair and looked around in surprise. He felt that the changes here seemed to be constant. The last time he came here, it was full of all kinds of strange instruments. Now, such a large empty area had been cleared out. Yuan Yuan raised her hand expressionlessly and hit him on the head to keep him awake. Raymond had already picked up his phone and was ready to record video. Opposite Huaishi, the muscular old man had taken off his jacket and pants, leaving only a pair of elastic shorts. He was leisurely moving his body, stepping on the ground barefoot, and testing the hardness of the ground with satisfaction. Then, he hooked his finger at Huaishi. What are you waiting for, Huaishi? He said, come on. Huaishi silently looked at the muscular old man opposite him, and suddenly he didn't want to fight. It was too greasy, and he didn't want to get close to him. There's a little girl here. Can't you pay attention to your personal image? It doesn't matter. Elder Luo put his hands on his knees, moved his neck, and turned 180 degrees. Suddenly, he looked back and grinned. As long as I beat you uglier than me, it'll be okay. At that moment, the inverted, ferocious, smiling face approached instantly. His muscles turned blue, and he instantly entered the state of exceeding the limit. Pure and terrifying muscle strength broke out at this moment, breaking through the air. Drummer. A dull collision sound rang out. Huaishi's eyes widened. When he reacted, he had bent down, and a fist mark appeared on his back. The blast spread out from the explosion point behind him. In an instant, he was suffocated. It was too fast. When the two sides had a tacit understanding, abandoned the holy mark and other blessings, and stayed on the same level, the huge gap between their skills was highlighted. One was in the sky, the other was on the ground. Huaishi even suspected that he was in the basement of the 18th floor of hell, and he couldn't see the gap between them. But this didn't prevent his body from instinctively fighting back in an instant. The hand of steel had already grasped Elder Luo's right hand while twitching. His left hand had been raised, clenched, and aimed at the old man's temple and smashed down. Triple thunderbolt skyfall. From the high-speed camera of Raymond's mobile phone, he could almost capture the muscles on Elder Luo's face gradually rippling under the huge impact. His facial features were distorted, and blood oozed out of his mouth and nose. He looked more ferocious. Suddenly, he grinned. Then, Huaishi's body suddenly rose into the air, and the two thick arms hugged his waist. He was pulled up from the ground, and after drawing an arc in the air like a rag, he smashed to the ground. Bang! A hurricane swept across, but there was no big pit on the ground. Huaishi's body had already rolled and bounced with the support of his arms and legs. He instantly retreated a few meters and lay on the ground. The skin on his arms cracked and bloody. He propped up his body and moved forward. Sprint, like a human cannonball. He charged forward with the support of Yu's step. Perhaps he could use Iron Mountain Lean to describe such a move, but the posture was completely different from Iron Mountain Lean. At best, it was a natural reflex formed by the body after countless fights. The floor under Elder Luo's feet cracked. He stood still. His hand grasped Huaishi's iron fist, and he seemed to be stunned. If it was in the past, not to mention such a smooth counterattack, Huaishi would have been paralyzed by him. You've improved, Huaishi, he exclaimed softly, and then his smile became more mocking. His experience had increased, but unfortunately, his skills had not kept up at all. The 5 fingers holding the iron fist suddenly closed, and sparks burst out from the friction with the steel. He firmly clamped down on him, then raised his thick arm and smashed it toward his head. Elbow strike. Huaishi took a step to the right and dodged the elbow that could pierce through gold and iron. But then, Elder Luo changed his move. On the arm that was chopping down, he raised his 5 fingers like a knife and slashed toward his neck. It was blocked. Huaishi raised his left arm, and his wrist blocked the hand knife that was chopping down. Then, he counterattacked along his wrist. It was also a hand knife. The hand knife that was infused with the strength of the drum hand was no different from a steel blade. If it was someone else, they would have been cut open from the wrist to the arm in an instant. But only a straight white mark was left on the muscles that had tightened and turned black in an instant. Elder Luo's arm shook like a steel pillar, and he broke Huaishi's counterattack posture and launched another attack. Under the suppression of each other's arms, in this space that was less than half a step away, the two arms carried a huge force, and they were almost fighting for their lives without mercy. In the fierce intertwining, Huaishi suddenly raised his head, aimed at the old man's smirking face, and smashed it down. This was the iron head that had faced the destruction element head-on. Bang! With a loud bang, both of them fell away at the same time. But the moment Huaishi stopped leaning back, he saw the iron fist in front of him. Push! He retreated and retreated again until he was forced to the wall, and there was no way to retreat. The iron fist was still hovering in front of him, wrapped in the power of thousands of pounds. It only needed to be pushed forward, and Huaishi would be like the legendary magician who couldn't accept scientific theories. His head would explode. The outcome was clear. 60 points. Elder Luo maintained his original posture and told him, "Huaishi, you passed." Huaishi couldn't help but laugh and wiped the nosebleed on his face. Are you going to say that I'm the worst student you've ever taught? Not necessarily, but you're definitely the one who paid the least tuition fee. Elder Luo sighed. What a loss. Damn, I only charged you 100,000. But since you can still keep up with the progress, then open your eyes and watch. At that moment, the old man grinned and announced in a solemn voice, the realm above the transcendent state. Chapter 807. You're bullshitting. This was Huaishi's first reaction. It wasn't that he looked down on Elder Luo's skills, nor was it that he didn't believe that there were still things in this world that he didn't know about. Even if Elder Luo were to tell him about a 3,000-word setting, he would still be able to accept it. However, this was the only thing that he found hard to believe. The realm above the ultra state. This was a false proposition in itself, because the ultra state was already the upper limit. It had nothing to do with one's strength. The ultra state was an excellent skill that could be used all the way up to the 5th tier, but the problem was it was a combination of one's origin substance and physical body. It was like overclocking a CPU. You've already overclocked it, so how could you overclock it again? Weren't you afraid of burning the machine? The reason why it was called the ultra state was because it was a realm that had already surpassed the limit. Now that he had surpassed the ultra state, whether or not this kind of doll-like method was reasonable didn't matter. But what was the difference between that and the ultra state itself? It was still within the ultra state's range, just to a different degree. You don't believe me? Elder Luo laughed mockingly. That's right. It's precisely because you don't believe me that you can't touch its edge. That's not reasonable at all. Elder Luo, you know what I'm talking about. Huaishi replied seriously. Reasonable? Is that thing even useful? Elder Luo's strange laughter became even more ear-piercing. If everything has to be reasonable, then nothing you want to do will work. Sometimes, if you want to succeed, you have to unreasonable. In that instant, an ear-piercing explosion rang out. Huaishi suddenly felt a sense of impending doom. Sweat poured down his back. He saw Elder Luo's iron fist push forward. Matter lost its outline. Everything collapsed in front of his eyes like bubbles. What replaced it was the terrifying light of 100,000 suns exploding at the same time. It swept out in all directions, swallowing everything. It broke through the floor, tore through the earth, broke through the ceiling, and shook the sky. The pure power turned into a tidal wave, surging forward in a straight line. It was like a surging tide, swallowing him whole. Huaishi's body instantly lost its senses. Then he seemed to see his own body being ignited by the mighty stream of light, burning and turning into charcoal. His face slowly cracked and peeled off. Countless ashes merged into the wind, revealing his hideous bones. In the end, the skull completely evaporated along with the body. He disappeared without a trace. But when he came back to his senses from the terrifying illusion, nothing seemed to have happened. The iron fist was still very close to him, and only the remaining fear and despair in his limbs and bones were still surging, suffocating him. He was drenched in sweat. In the video, Huaishir seemed to have been bewitched at that moment. His face was pale, and he was frozen in place. His eyes became dull, and he seemed to have lost his soul. Only the people present could feel the terrifying power that flashed through the old man's body in that instant. It was a terrifying miracle formed by the convergence of pure power. Destruction. Pure destruction. The Bhagavad Gita said that at this moment he seemed to have become death, the destroyer of the world. In the dead silence, Huaishir stared blankly with his eyes wide open. His body slowly slid down the wall, unable to stand up. His hands were trembling. If Elder Luo had really thrown that punch, he would have really died. He would have died without a complete corpse. Do you feel it now? Elder Luo slowly retracted his fist and laughed mockingly. This is the punch that knocked the king of heretics down into the abyss. It's the pinnacle of pure skill. How did you do it? Huaishir couldn't believe it. He couldn't understand. How did you explode with so much power at that moment? If Huaishir's daily full-strength punch was 10, then Elder Luo's output could be at least 80. However, the terrifying pressure that Huaishir felt at that moment was no longer 800. It couldn't even be described as 8,000. 80,000? 800,000? Or more? It's very simple, Huaishir. Elder Luo thought for a while and said seriously, it's like when you train, lactic acid will accumulate in your muscles. You just need to accumulate this strength and lactic acid during your training. Over time, dripping water will wear through a stone. 1 brick a day, one day, you'll also have your own pyramid. Huaishir's anger was almost gone. What nonsense is that? Of course, I'm serious. Am I joking? Elder Luo looked at him doubtfully and said seriously, this move is like that. The principle is clear. That's why it's called supreme lactic acid accumulation. What's the difference between this and senior sisters taking advantage of the wind and taking advantage of the blade? Huaishir refuted angrily. However, his words stopped abruptly. He couldn't even say the last word, don't. Was there a difference? There was no difference. Similarly, they all sounded completely nonsensical, and there was no feasibility to speak of in terms of goddamn tricks. However, they were all used in front of Huaishir. It's as if the world has been distorted, right? Elder Luo laughed strangely. Huaishir, you've created so many miracles with your own hands and done so many impossible things. Why can't you believe that people can create miracles? He raised his palm and waved it at Huaishir. His 5 fingers clenched into a fist. This was his miracle. Now, the miracle was in his hands. Drummer and U-steps are just entry-level skills that were separated from the state of exceeding the limit. However, the state of exceeding the limit is also just a stepping stone to this path. Countless years of training and pain are all to make people reach the limit, recognize the limit, and then deny the limit. Elder Luo said, this is the threshold to supreme. Huaishir looked at him in a daze. He couldn't react. It was too magical, causing his brain to shut down. What was the difference between this and magic? However, what was the difference between the magic of the past and the technology of the present? It was just that one was the law of the gods, and the other was the law and framework established by countless scholars. However, this was completely different from the scholar's law. The scholar's law needed to be projected on the silver ocean. Through this unparalleled power of wisdom as the source, it was finally implemented through the power of Zarathustra's great mystery. At this moment, the so-called supreme that Elder Luo displayed, Huaishir widened his eyes. Have you finally realized it, Huaishir? Elder Luo grinned. As expected, you're not so stupid that you can't be saved. It's just like that. The so-called supreme is not relying on external objects. It's through the user's training and the iron will of the only soul that forcefully implements the law on matter. Through a person's power and will to distort reality, forming a magic that belonged to only one person. Isn't this a little too exaggerated? Huaishir still couldn't accept it. Using a soul's will to modify the matter in front of him? This, to a certain extent, it had already reached the realm of the creator, right? Even if it was just a little bit apart. Although there are parts of it that conform to the rules of matter, in the end, this power itself is unreasonable. It doesn't conform to the common sense of ordinary people and the rules of the Silver Ocean, Elder Luo said. You have to believe in it. It doesn't matter even if you're the only one who believes in it. What do you children say again? He pinched his chin and thought for a while. Then he smiled. The heart of belief is magic. With one's soul, deny the reality in front of him and modify the matter in front of him through his own mind. No matter how small the modification was, it could still create a jaw-dropping result. It felt like walking to the right, while walking to the left could avoid the attack. Then, the opponent would definitely not be able to hit him. As long as he could seize the opportunity, not only could he take advantage of the wind's inattention, he could even take advantage of the iron's inattention. If he could take advantage of the air's inattention, he would definitely be able to hit the opponent, no matter how long the distance was. Therefore, if the lactic acid could be accumulated, there would be no problem to store this power in the muscles like a deposit. Among 100,000 practitioners, perhaps 10,000 people could learn the skills of the drummer and use steps. However, only 100 people could reach the realm of exceeding the limit. However, among these 100 people who exceeded the limit, there might not be one who could reach the final goal. There is no need to seek inspiration through the accumulation of knowledge and research of scholars. There is also no need to search for miracles in hell like alchemists. As long as he believed in himself. He believed in himself more than anyone else. Even if the whole world was standing opposite him, everyone would deny it. As long as he still had a fist, he would wave it. He had to defeat pain, despair, and all the enemies in front of him. He even had to defeat fate. This boundless and inflated determination was the so-called supreme tier. Hey, that brat from the Eye of Nightmare. Elder Luo glanced sideways at Raymond, who was watching the show in the distance. Your tide-slaying posture is quite standard. What's your relationship with Avery? It's my master. Raymond's expression twitched. But my relationship with him isn't very good now. If you have a grudge with him, you can settle it with him. Elder Luo shook his head indifferently. If it's him, I remember that he should have something similar, right? Yes, but my master doesn't call it supreme. Instead, he calls it beast soul. Raymond scratched his face and smiled bitterly. But I'm not very talented and can't get started. That's normal. His method doesn't suit you. Elder Luo pursed his lips. You can't learn it even if you want to. At this level, forget it. That kind of pity was undoubtedly shown, but Raymond didn't even dare to be angry. He could only nod his head vigorously. You're right. Huaishir had experienced the supreme of the Eye of Nightmare's great Azura Iverson before. It was different from Elder Luo's technique. It was a constant state that could be maintained for a long time without needing to be activated. Simply put, it was an unreasonable sure hit. When the sword slashed down, no matter how the opponent ran or dodged, there was no way to stop the sword blade. He had to block it with his own strength. If he couldn't block it, he would die. It was this incomparable confidence and arrogance towards one's own power that forged the foundation of this supreme tier. As for the other, Elder Luo glanced at Yuan. Weren't the Yuan family's righteous blood and loyal heart the same? It was even more exaggerated than the others, directly locking their HP. So, do you want to learn it, Huaishir? In the silence, Elder Luo lowered his head to look at his face and smiled kindly. Although you might not be able to comprehend lactic acid accumulation, there must be a more suitable supreme for you. If you want to learn, I can teach you. That you're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.